If he's made... Oh, there he is. Hello, caller. You're on the air.
How are you, sir?
I'm good.
How are you?
Yourself?
I am outstanding.
Excellent.
Still a
We're
little
gonna
tired,
get
but I'm good.
video from you, or are you using your cam otherwise?
No, you can video me if you want.
Okay. Well, that's your button to hit.
There you go.
Boomer.
Boomer Mike. I never promised anything different.
You did not. So let's get you on here for
Is it
everybody else.
is it working?
It's not yet. No.
Oh, hold on.
Hold on.
Boomer Mike at it again.
At it
Boomer
again.
Mike at it again. 1 second. Let me try it
Okay.
again. There we
you
go.
That is
Boomer
not
Mike.
where you usually stream from.
So how are you guys doing?
I'm doing okay. How are you?
I'm all right. Yeah. A little tired.
You sound a little frazzled.
No, I just had a long night and then a longer day.
Okay.
But I'm good.
Excellent. Mike, why don't you kick us off with letting us know who you are? I think most of my crowd at this point is familiar with you, but, never know who's going to stumble into this and not know. Why is Mike from PA, a.k.a. Central Committee, somebody that I'm talking to?
Well, a lot of people know me from my work with the Majority Report, where I was a producer there for a short time, and I call in a lot, and I'm a contributor there. But my background is one of political organizing and policy work and various progressive campaigns here in my home state. And so I've decided to enter the Twitch, fray, and I did so a little bit with a splash when I took on Destiny head to head. I think it was 8-9 days ago.
Yeah, it was
And
just about a week, give or take.
and and since that point, we've had a pretty successful start to my stream over at Central Committee, and I kind of focus on some of these left arguments from a more policy-based empirical point of view. Not that everybody doesn't try to use evidence, right? And by the way, did I lose you? Okay.
No, I'm right here. No, that was me fucking with my mic like an idiot.
No problem. And so, I think I brought that kind of perspective just because I've spent so much time organizing and in policy that's something that a lot of commentators don't have. And I think I brought that fresh angle to Twitch. And I think this is a growing, exciting platform for people on the left. And so I've just been trying to interface with as many people on the left as I can and build a good network of mutual support and aid. And I think it's working pretty well.
Yeah, I would say you got in at exactly the right moment in Twitch history. That could end up being wrong. It might be even better in the near future due to people like you, etc., that are joining us. But right now feels like a great time to be a part of things.
Yeah, I feel the same way, and I think a lot of the people that blaze the trail, like you, for the left on Twitch, like I've felt nothing but positive vibes, honestly, since I came in. My experience has been pretty fun and engaging, and the chat has actually been pretty uplifting, and I think a lot of that can be pointed to work that you've done, right? Being and others.
Yeah, I definitely not me exclusively.
Yeah.
Like far
But I'm on your
from.
stream, so I can be nice to you.
That's
But
fair. I don't have any real say in anything, though. I am not the ass to kiss.
no. Yeah. You could say it's ass kissing, or I'm just trying to be humble because I know how hard it is to go into a new place that's never had a left voice before and be that person. It can be intimidating, especially something like Twitch, which had a reputation as being kind of a gamer bro area,
Hmm.
on the internet, and that's not been my experience. And I know that's in large part because of work that people like you have done. So it's been entertaining, and I assume that's going to change.
Yeah,
I assume it's going to get a little
I
bit worse.
I've started having conversations on Twitter now with I've had two or three people at this point uh, that have said that they were originally several years ago. They were trying to talk about leftist ideals and
Mhm.
politics, and they were being shouted down so much by the trolls that they gave up on that, and they're incredibly heartened by the resurgence that's happening now. And it's voices like yours that definitely have caused that, right? Like I certainly have a local impact here on Twitch, but I think it's the overall atmosphere in our nation that is allowing for that to exist overall.
Yeah, yeah. No, I can see why that would be. And one of the things to me is that we're living in kind of a unique moment in American history. And I think if you're just getting into politics, you might not realize it, but traditionally we've never really had strong left voices to organize around.
And not
You
since the
know,
Depression.
not yeah, not basically since FDR. Honestly, I mean, there's been a few people, but now we have like major candidates, front runners that are firmly in the left of the Democratic Party, and that kind of opportunity doesn't come around that often. And so I think it's part of a cultural awakening that's happening. It's not just something that's happening on Twitch, where a few years ago these ideas would have been, outside the mainstream, that,
Right.
no expectation that, people have ever encountered it before, to now, like you have Bernie, you have Warren, you have other people openly espousing, these espousing these ideas. And so culturally, we have that, um, I don't know if permission, but that cachet. So when we go in places and spaces like Twitch, it's not a surprise. We're just part of a larger cultural movement.
Right. But you said just a minute ago that you were met by nothing but warm-hearted, open arms and everything.
Mhm.
Isn't that in direct contrast to the left being the real fascists, though?
Yeah, I mean, that's the other element to it, is while we have a left movement that's growing, we also have a fascist movement that's growing. And this is not a surprise if you know your history, because leftism and fascism are reactions to crises in capitalism and a failure to of the mainstream to deal with the problems that the majority of society is facing. And so, there's tremendous opportunity, but there's also tremendous risk. And I think every day we, as a cis white dude, I have a lot of privilege. So for me, it's not as an existential of a threat in my day to day life, but for many others, it is. And so I'm working using my privilege and my position to give space to others who and lend a hand as much as I can. And so we have to face that, unique moment that we're in. We have tremendous opportunity, but also tremendous risk. And so we've got to be focused and be intentional in how we act.
That's uh, that's a thing that very few voices seem to actually care about, apart from on our side of the aisle, as it were. And it's very hard to make that reach out to anybody because they the adage that's been going around for more than 5 years at this point: when you're seated in a position of privilege, anytime other people start being treated equally, it ends up feeling like their rights are being taken away, right?
Right.
And
Oh, we could get into this. This is something of
sure,
a
hit me.
of
Because
a of a, a
one thing
bugaboo for
that
me.
seems to differentiate you a little bit from, I'd say, the average left Twitch individual is you're a little bit older. You've done actual organization, and
Mhm.
you seem to be a much more serious commentator. No shade to myself or the Surfs or anybody like that. Love them all to death, Lance. Uh,
Lance
but
is
uh,
great.
yeah, no, I love Lance to death. I originally planned to have him for like an hour last week, and we went for 2.5. Um, but yeah, I really like that you seem to have an incredibly broad, very academic knowledge of most of the things that concern the left, and I
Right.
am all here for listening to you talk about them. Let's talk about people losing their privileges and feeling like they're being punished.
So this is something that is pretty well studied, and I'm no expert on this, but I would recommend that everybody, for a foundational text, you should read the new Jim Crow. You should read White Fragility. These are two really good, important foundational books for anybody on the left, especially us white comrades, to understand like what's going on here. And when people talk about loss of privilege, in America, our racial caste system, which is alive and well, is part of a complex web of relationships and social conditions that support the capitalist system that we have. And so a lot of poor whites were given what's academically known as the racial bribe, right? Instead of getting actual material goods for poor whites,
Hmm.
you were given this social position that was
Right,
superior to all blacks, right? The lowest white man is higher than the highest, most accomplished black man, because no matter what the black guy does, ultimately he has this immutable characteristic of his skin color. So just
right,
because you're living in terrible conditions and you don't have health care, you have low wages, and you're precarious economically, you have that social position. And that served an important role for capitalists in our society so that they could maintain the exploitative relations, even of white workers as well as black workers, and prevent that cross-racial solidarity from forming, because that's the biggest threat to the capitalist class, to the wealthy in our society, if that makes any sense. So when what's happening in our society now is, there is an assault on racial privilege, which is welcomed, but there isn't but us on the left, we need to recognize that there also needs to be a universalist support for the poor and working class of all races. So when a white person is giving up their racial privilege, they're not really giving up anything of substance.
sure,
Because when women became, you know, uh, when the feminist movement has grown and continued and still has a lot of work to do, but that didn't cost men anything. That actually
right,
enhanced our position. And for people like me, having a relationship with an equal is superior to having a relationship with a subordinate. And much the same way, having the most talented people of all different races rise up in our society enhances my and all of our well-being. And so that is kind of the story that we on the left have to do is when we get rid of this racial caste system, we need to also uplift all of our society and all of the poor and all of the working class. And those sometimes can feel like they're in tension, but in my view, they're not. And we also need to recognize that some people are trying to encourage those racial tensions in order to maintain the status quo.
sure. But
And
how
that's what
how can you possibly say though, Mike, that white men are benefiting from everything when they have to be so careful about the things they say? There are so many men now that are afraid to even have a woman alone in their office because of the allegations that may happen and all of the punishments that may be visited upon them.
yeah.
Not to
Yeah.
straw man too hard, just
Well, I don't think you're straw manning. I think you're steel manning their position, honestly.
I
Yeah, that's the thing that's funny to me is, how do I put this? On the right, they create phantom risks in response to real oppression, right? So we know that communities of color, get about half as much money spent on their schools as suburban white areas. And when you confront this disparity, this racial disparity, stuff is thrown up like what you just talked about, phantom things about phantom risks, and fear is generated, as opposed to, and that's to confront something that's really happening. And so, on the one hand, we should work to dispel these myths. On the other hand, some of them are so ridiculous that there's nothing you could do but laugh.
Right.
And you have to balance your approach, in my view. um, and I think the best way of doing that is to offer something compelling. um, that's why I think policies like Medicare for all are so important. Not to get too off into the policies, it's
Sure.
just you are offering something that the right can never offer because they fundamentally don't believe in it. And it's something that 95% of us would benefit no matter what our racial identity is. And it's something that we could use to build those patterns of racial solidarity. So in the future, when as we build that solidarity, we can also confront racial and ethnic and other forms of oppression in an intersectional manner, while also addressing a fundamental need that we all share. So we create those patterns of transracial solidarity, not trans, I'm sorry, cross-racial solidarity, and at the same time, Rachel Dolezal popped in my head for a second,
Right.
but
That was the joke I was gonna make. Yeah. I think that's
yeah,
the
sorry
only
about that.
joke to be made on that one.
Yeah. But and so I think that's what we do. And then, but on the other hand, the one thing that makes some people uncomfortable, but hard experience tells me is sometimes you just have enemies, and some people you can't save.
Right.
And you'll reach out to them a million times, and they're always going to find some other bad faith reason why they won't change their mind. And so that is part of something that needs to be in your toolbox, which is recognizing an enemy, uh, you know and standing in
Right.
opposition to them.
Um,
Sometimes it just happens.
that makes me think of probably the last time that I thought that my parents were worth talking to about these sorts of things. They turned into Trumpites eventually because of Fox News. We were having a
Right.
political discussion, random visit home, and they kept bringing up that Obama had created more czars than any other president ever, and I was like, well, that's just the title he's using to people that he's putting in cabinet positions and everything. Why does that matter to anything? And all they could focus on was this Russian sounding word that was alarmist and ridiculous. And you just mentioned things that you and I would only think laughable. How do you begin to confront that sort of talking point, that sort of ridiculous rhetoric that has no grounding in anything that we would call reality?
Yeah,
The internet goblins are eating you, Mike. I don't know if you can hear me. My internet appears to be stable, but you have disappeared entirely. You appear to have been frozen in mid sneeze. It was the Russians, Spirit World. It was the Russians. We're gonna give him a second for his Discord to catch up with us here. Benzar with the emotes for everything. I love it. I love it to death. Let's poke at some things over here. Yeah, we've lost the video. Let's hit the leave call button. Uh, Give him a call back. See if that fixes it. Maybe he kicked his internet out or something. Hard to say for sure. Could be the shortest interview I've done yet. Oh. Welcome back.
okay. Yeah. Wow. I don't know what happened there. I'm
Yeah,
so sorry.
The internet happens.
Yeah, that
The
was weird. I just had like a huge lag spike there.
Sure.
Some
So
ISP problem. Sorry
we
about
didn't
that.
catch anything that you said. What do we do to the people that have these ridiculous, unfounded ideas?
Right. So you were you diagnosed the problem really well, which was the Fox News problem, or what is part of a larger network of like right wing propaganda.
Right. I mean, it's
Um,
Koch brothers writ large, but
yeah, and um, I don't know if you've talked about this on your stream before, so stop me if I'm just repeating something you've
oh, we
covered. But
Twitch is
um,
nothing but repetition, man. Live production.
yeah. So there's a historical moment, and it's encapsulated by a specific document known as the Powell Memo. Um, and it was written by a Supreme Court justice appointed by Richard Nixon. And it was a plan to create an alternate ecosystem of right wing talk, news. Roger Ailes was part of the Powell Memo, and they created these institutions of right wing media that were independent of the mainstream media and academia, which they had considered to be captured by leftists, right?
Okay.
And so this is part of a long term plan for the past 30, 40 years
Yeah, because in
to
the
create.
'60s, most media, especially written media, was very left leaning.
Well, I would, center left. It was
Sure.
factual, based on an objective model view,
Right.
and trying its best to, we had the fairness doctrine, which was a thing that required that all media be balanced in its coverage, which sounds bad because we're used to the Fox fair and balanced model of not really balanced. But when there were only three or four networks, there wasn't a echo chambers formed, right? And so what you're talking about when you talked about your parents is you can do all this work deprogramming them, and then when you leave the room and they settle on the couch and they turn on Fox News again, all that work is just slowly going to be undone.
Right.
So the first thing I would say is if you're encountering a loved one and they're trapped in the right wing media bubble, the most important thing you can do is try to get them out of that bubble. If they have a pattern of behavior where they watch Fox News, you need to find them a new thing to watch. Because even the best organizer and the best information, the human mind is not one that infinitely recalls things at all times with equal weight. It's a relational thing, and if all they're doing is training their cognition in a right wing frame, they're going to operate in that frame. Um, so you have to find them alternative sources. There's actually been studies done on this where in zip codes where Fox News appears before CNN and MSNBC on the channel list, there's a
Wow.
measurable increase of support for Republicans.
That's just like the studies that I'm familiar with. That you get what 5 to 8% by being alphabetically first on most elections.
Yeah, I mean, the rate it's a few points. I don't know
Yeah.
about 8%, but yeah,
But
it's definitely
alarmingly more than you would think. It wasn't
right.
statistical noise.
Yeah, like you want to be the top of the ballot or the bottom for a multi-candidate elections, right? So, um, no, this is not a new webcam, just different settings. And Boomer Mike, don't ask me how to do this stuff. I'm not the audiovisual guy.
Yeah, you're fine.
But so what's the answer to that? Like, yeah, it's one of those things. Like, gosh, I hate to be diabolical, but like going in your parents' parental controls and blocking Fox
I
News,
I've read
you know,
that screen
not the worst
captured
idea.
Twitter comment or Reddit comment or something, and they said it worked.
Of course, it would work.
Yeah,
And by the way, this cuts both ways. For example, as you could probably see behind me, I'm a Bernie bro, right?
yeah,
And one of the things that we found recently in a poll was that watchers of MSNBC were the least likely to support Bernie Sanders. And that's not a mistake. It's because MSNBC relentlessly spends their time with bad faith criticism of Bernie Sanders, right?
Sure.
And so if you are somebody who watches a lot of MSNBC, you're probably not a supporter of Bernie. That's just, media has an impact on you.
Right.
And there's no way around that. So yeah, the first thing, and this is the same thing with my relatives, right? Like, those that listen to talk radio while they're commuting, right-wing talk radio, and then watch Fox News at home, they're going to be right-wingers.
Yeah.
And so, like, we have to oppose those organizations. We have to attack their credibility, and then in our personal relationships, we have to try to deprogram people and get them reading and watching something else. And I can give you all the facts and evidence you want, but that's not necessarily how most people vote. And
Right.
and stop me if I start gish galloping too much, because I have that
Well, I
tendency
mean, this isn't a
going.
debate. You can't fucking gallop a discussion.
Well, no, yeah, I jump around too much. It's a bad habit that I have.
No,
And I
I'm
don't
just here to fucking groove with you for as long as you'll hang out, man.
and I have the white male confidence where I could just keep talking and
No, that's
talking.
I I don't watch a lot of Twitch, but I've found myself really enjoying your streams because you can keep that stream of consciousness going in a way that a lot of people can't. Because it's the type of content I like to put out myself because it's
Mm.
what I know I like to watch.
Well, yeah. Well, thank you for that. So where was I? I was talking
We're
about
about
Fox
to
News.
begin other topics about
Oh, yeah, okay,
media bias.
how people vote, how people vote. So, like, you know, it's a really complex thing, and it's weird. Um, People do not vote based on well, I mean, okay, let me put it this way. A small percentage of people, 10% or less, vote based on a coherent ideology. Like an account of the world that's logically
Is
consistent.
is that even considering just like single issue voters?
Um I mean, I guess, but if you're a single issue voter, what that means necessarily is that all other of your issues you just put to a back seat,
Right.
and you're probably going to be like most other voters. Um, like, for example, there is a kind of stereotypical type of voter who is left wing economically, kind of moderate socially, but they're pro life and they vote on that only.
Sure. Yeah.
So, like that
Completely
type.
canceling out the rest of their ideology.
Right,
Yeah.
because, like, you could believe that, we need to provide, free education and healthcare for all and all these other great views, but if you think abortion bans are the most important thing for me and you vote for a Republican, objectively, what you're doing in reality is all those privately held opinions you have no effect on the world, because the only objective political act you are doing is your vote. And so if you vote for a Republican, it doesn't matter that you believe all those other things, because the Republican politician that goes into office is going to oppose them. And I am, while I'm firmly on the left, I'm also, a strategic mind and very practical politically, which occasionally gets people, to come at me.
Sure.
I was like, for example, like, I think Donald Trump has been probably just as bad as I thought, if not worse.
Man,
And
I I had this fantasy because I was not very politically active, but I knew that he had a history of some very left-leaning things. And I had this fantasy that he was pretending so that he could Trojan horse in some very progressive ideas, and that that ridiculous nonsense went out the door within the first week or two of him being in office. But I had this like holding my breath, fingers crossed. Maybe it's not as bad as it looks. Hope.
yeah, well, and the thing is, like, and you saw this with Obama to a lesser extent as well, but um, the thing about outsider candidates is the president is a very important position. I know this is kind of an obvious point, but you are responsible for filling thousands of positions within the federal bureaucracy. And if you're just some guy who has a reality TV show, you're not going to know enough policy people and enough serious thinkers that you trust and have had a relationship with that you can put in these positions. And so
Right.
Donald Trump relied upon the RNC and the institution Republican Party to fill these positions.
Right. Except
And
in the
so,
cases where he put his fucking business cronies in.
right, but for the most part, he just put in, and he actually put it. What's funny about that is he probably put in more of the extreme and more discredited types in because more moderate and credentialed and respectable Republicans didn't want to be associated with Trump, right? And so, although that's changing now, I think pretty much everybody in the Republican Party has accepted that Trump is the future,
Yeah.
and they have sworn fealty to him. But
Yeah,
prior to
I
that,
2024 is going to be a fucking nightmare.
um, and so similarly with Obama, when he was elected, he ran in the progressive lane, as they say, but he had only been a senator for 3 years when he won the nomination. He didn't have his own policy shop, and he relied on Hillary Clinton and he basically put in most of Hillary Clinton's network into those positions, and he ran as a progressive, but he kind of ruled as a moderate, and I don't think that's a very controversial point of view. And so that's why I'm skeptical of people who haven't been in the game that long as nominees, like someone like
Sure.
Pete Boot, Edge, or however you say his name. I've heard
Booty
a million things.
judge.
Booty Judge. Oh
Yeah.
Jesus. Uh,
Look, let's if we're gonna talk like this, we may as well have all the Destiny stands come at us for transphobia too.
yeah. I mean, he is a 35-year-old mayor of a college town. He's not ready to be president
Sure.
in any shape or form. Like, and if he were to get the nomination, he would be completely reliant on the institutional Democratic Party. And I don't know if you know this, but this is why the institutional Democratic Party is why Trump won, because there's been a disconnect between that party and the needs of the voters and what's been delivered. And you can
Right.
blame the Republicans, but
When they went into power, the Tea Party themselves represented such an incredible minority of the thoughts on the right, and they were able to hijack such a significant portion of what happened that it's become the normal planks of the Republican platform. Like, how do we do that?
well, can you say
We
that
we got
again?
to Tea Party the Democrats. Like,
Oh, yeah. Oh, no,
that's
no, no. Of course. So this is actually part of my project, so to speak, is dispelling some of the myths about moderates, right? And the myths about the blue dogs. Um, One of the ideas is like, listen, we don't want to be too extreme, because if we're too extreme, then it's going to imperil those moderates in the swing purple areas. And if we lose those guys, then we're going to lose the majority, and the
right.
Republicans are going to be in control. So don't challenge the blue dog Democrats. Don't call anybody out. Don't put pressure on them to vote for stuff like Medicare for all or $50 minimum wage or immigration reform or anything important, because if you do, they're going to lose. And first of all, most blue dog Democrats are in safe Democratic seats. They're not in
Right.
swing districts.
Yeah, huge
Um,
margins.
I made like a really shitty spreadsheet, and I went and I got all the members of the Blue Dog Caucus and I investigated every single one of their districts. And only 7 of 27 were in what I would consider Republican leaning seats.
Okay.
Another 7 of the 27 were in purple seats. But if you do the math, basically half of them are in safe blue seats. Like I'm talking about D+8 or more. Like you
Okay.
just can't lose these. Why do we have somebody who's in a D+8 seat or D+15 voting like a Republican? how can you justify that? And I could give some examples of like Dan
Well,
Lipinski up in Illinois, as an example, I think he's the co-chair of the pro-life caucus. He voted against the Affordable Care Act. I mean, he, I don't think he would refuse to endorse Obama in 2012, and he's in a D+15 seat. So what's going on here? And so that's why the DCCC. And by the way, I don't know if you saw the blacklist. That was a story that came out this year, where the DCCC, which is the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, basically the people in charge with electing Democrats in the House of Representatives,
right.
came out and said, we're going to blacklist any consultant, any organizer who works with a primary campaign of a city against a sitting Democrat, no matter how bad.
That's yeah.
And so that's that shows you why we need institutional change in the Democratic
Yeah.
Party.
Well, it's part of it is the fact that the thing that started being called out is that people on the left, or Democrats specifically, not necessarily further left. Most of us that are on the extreme left have given up on the institutions, but people in the Democratic parties are constantly trying to put faith in the system. If you just put everything into the system works properly,
Oh
and you
God,
just
no.
have to believe that it's going to work. But the functioning of the system at this point has been distorted so far by bad faith action, and we continue to allow both sides to consolidate more and more executive power to the point where it's getting really dangerous. Like, that we allowed Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan to deny the the Supreme Court nominations for an entire year. I can't believe that occurred. It blows my mind that a flag wasn't planted in the ground firmly on that issue and said, absolutely, you are not going to undermine the basic tenets of how our system works. And yet they continue to insist, if you work within the system, it will do what it needs to do to fix things. I don't know what my point was, but
No, I see what your point is. Here, let
sure.
me support it. So, like, if you look at times in American history when we made significant progress, right? Um, one of the myths is that they were gradual. No, they
No,
weren't gradual.
we ended
Now,
slavery immediately and then had a war over it.
right. So okay, let me put it okay, so there's two things. Like, there was activism going on in the background that
Sure.
came to a head, and that created a moment of tremendous progress. Sort of, if you know evolution, like, one of the theories is punctuated equilibrium, right? Where you have long periods of stability, and then you have some big event which causes rapid evolution, and then there's another long period of stability. And
Right.
that's kind of the way I look at politics too, is you build up this pressure. There's these mistakes in the system or failures to address problems, and that pressure builds and builds and builds until it gets to an extreme moment, and that causes the gears of gridlock to start moving
Sure.
because there's so much pressure. So, like, if you look, for example, at, say, the 30s, right, and with the New Deal and all the significant progress we made, basically the reason why the United States is a coherent country is because of FDR and all of the things he put in. We basically were a collection of states. It wasn't really a coherent nation until the New Deal came in, and it put in most of the major um, administrative bodies that make our country work.
Right. And the New
Um,
Deal is, by most respects, more extremely left than most of what we're proposing in today's climate, right?
oh yeah, I mean, if you look at what Bernie says, and Bernie is a huge, buff of the 1930s, is he's trying to just get
Well,
the.
I mean, he was
So when
born in them,
FDR,
right?
no, he wasn't. Born in the 40s, I think. But um, he's trying to get the second part of FDR's New Deal. So FDR said that The things that he wanted to do after World War II was he wanted to have everyone be guaranteed a good job, everyone be guaranteed education, everyone be guaranteed healthcare, everyone be what else? There was other stuff, but basically like things that we don't have today. And that is the plan. And there are countries around the world where they guarantee all those things. These are well-worn social democratic policies that are not radical or wild. They're actually doable, and they objectively make your society better.
Right.
But how did FDR do that? This is linking it back to your point. Did he just, as God on high, hand it down to us, the people? That's not how it worked. There was tremendous organizing on the ground. There was labor. There were protests. There were political engagement from people who had never been politically engaged before as a reaction to the Depression and reaction to their material conditions. And with the combination of all those factors, FDR was able to enact those major reforms on our society. And then, the same thing if you look at LBJ and the civil rights movement, right? It wasn't because LBJ necessarily as a benefactor looked down on our society, made changes. It was a robust civil rights movement, lots of direct action combined with political pressure that created the conditions that allowed LBJ to pass those major reforms. And so similarly today, we can't just rely on the Democratic Party and the technocrats to make decisions for us and rule over us, and we just have to trust them. No, we need to exert maximum pressure on them and make politicians fear for their jobs in order for them to have the political will and the support necessary to enact those big changes. And so you're right. We've got to form, and so to conclude, you're right. We need to form independent structures of power outside the Democratic Party, while also some of us need to go within the Democratic Party and take over as much of that as we can so that those efforts combined can exert pressure on whoever the eventual Democratic nominee is, hopefully Democratic president, Democratic Senate, so that we can accomplish these progressive goals that we have for our society.
So what I heard there, Mike, was parallel power structures.
Yep.
That's a commie talking point, as I understand it.
I wouldn't call it a commie talking point. I would call it a left talking point, which is
Sure.
like what, for example, like you can call me an old school lefty in the sense that I have tremendous faith in the power of organized labor, right? Um, and in our society, organized labor is constantly under attack. What kind of direct actions and organizing they can do, they are prescribed by a long list of crimes, basically. And they will put union leaders in prison if they do a lot of things that are standard behavior in other countries, like secondary boycotts and things like that. Like if you as a union leader endorse some of these things, you will be put in jail.
I am
Um,
not familiar with what a secondary boycott is,
it's like
and I think there were
it's
too
like
many
so,
pronouns there for me to follow who you meant, too. Did you mean that those were laws that are in place in other countries or in our own?
in ours
Okay.
that are not, and we also have a very so like. But the thing about organized labor, and you saw this in the government shutdown, is they're one of the best labor leaders in our country is a woman by the name of Sarah Nelson. She is the president of the International Association of Flight Attendants.
Right. They
And
control all travel for big business.
so one of the transportation, particularly air travel, is one of the most unionized forms of transit that we have, believe it or not. And there is tremendous labor militantism and activity in the airlines. And correspondingly, pilots and flight attendants have pretty good pay and really good, rest rules and work rules and stuff like that. And they also are politically engaged And so when the government shutdown happened, part of that is that the air traffic control system is run by our government, and every air traffic controllers are paid by the government. They're employees of the government, and they were ordered to continue working without pay. And that happened for about a month.
Yeah. And
And
then what
then
happened?
and then what happened is Sarah Nelson organized, and I think she sat down with the president of the ALPA, which is the Airline Pilots Association, which is the international for them, for airline pilots, and said, "We are not going to show up to work unless you start paying the air traffic controllers, and we're going to shut down air transit in the United States." And within a day or two, the government shutdown was over. And so that was due to the fact that we had those independent left-leaning structures of power that said, "Listen, politicians, right-wing politicians, if you don't open this government, we're going to shut this country's economy down." And that threat ended the government shutdown.
Yeah. I
And so
I remember it.
that's why, yeah,
TSA was deeply involved with the action as well, right?
right. TSA was also, I believe, not being paid. And so they started to do what's known as a sick out, where you're not striking, but you just everyone calls in sick,
Right.
and then you can't do things. So
Um,
hey
we
Hasan.
should note Hasan rating us right now. Hasan Piker of the Young Turks. Hello,
Hey buddy.
Hassanites. Thank you all very much for coming here. I appreciate it. We're talking to Central Committee, aka Mike from PA.
And
Mike, you
we're
want to
just
give
talking.
a quick shout out to who you are again? I think most of Hassan's crowd are probably familiar with you, but let's do a reintroduction since we now literally have 20 times the viewers that we had at the beginning of this.
Hey guys, Central Committee, Mike from PA. You probably know who I am. If you don't, go over to my channel, open it in a new tab, hit the follow button. You know me. I was a former producer on the Majority Report for a short while, but my professional experiences in organizing for progressive campaigns and policy. I've worn most of the hats that you can wear in a progressive campaign. You know, field organizer, finance, political, policy. So that's why hey, thanks. Hey, Hasan. How are you doing, buddy?
Yeah,
Um,
some might say it would be praxis to follow Mike.
it's definitely praxis. Definitely praxis to follow me. And we were just discussing organizing principles. I'm not streaming because I wanted to give Alebrelle my full attention. Um, so maybe after this interview, I'll start up my stream. Um, but yeah, yeah, there you go. There's my and I'm also famous for debating destiny a few times,
Yeah, yeah.
and most people think that I did pretty well. So, by the way, emotes. Let me check that. Somebody asked me a question. See if the emotes work. Um, Now, I've been an affiliate for approximately 6 days. So, and I submitted my emotes last like Friday, and they're not approved.
Yeah, I just did a new emote here about a week ago, and it took about 6 days for it to go live. So you're looking at about a week turnaround right now.
So we're talking about all those really exciting and I put in my partner application a couple days ago. So we'll
Yeah,
see. We'll see if
how
they.
many Twitter did you talk to somebody that does partnerships or anything? Do you have any idea of whether your platform was large enough for that to matter to them?
I didn't, but I attached it. I said yes to the question of do you have your own stuff?
Right.
But I also qualified for the whatever path the partnership shit is. So
Oh yeah, you because you hit the scene with like 200 to 300 viewers, right?
yeah, so I've averaged pretty much in that range for most of my stream. Um, so when am I gonna get Sam to stream? RuneScope, I've tried so hard. I've tried so hard to get Sam Cedar to come more on Twitch. So if you come and follow me on Twitch and support my channel, it will, forgive the plugs, it will incentivize Sam to do it. I can tell you that. He's paying attention to how I
But
do. So
Mike, isn't that a capitalist framing? How can you possibly do? How can you be a leftist if you're talking about incentivizations?
hey, listen, we all got to eat, right?
Oh
It
yeah,
is it is a society. So well, yeah. All right, well, let's get back to it. I think everybody's
sure.
plugged
I think we're
out.
relatively settled in.
Yeah.
But yeah, so what's your specialization in activism out there in Pennsylvania? What do you do? I lived in Pittsburgh for about 8 years myself, so I've got a rough idea of what's happening out in Pennsylvania right now. But what's it? Toomey, Toomey in Pittsburgh is one of the notorious Republican uh, senators. He's a
Yeah, yeah.
congressperson
Senator, yeah.
who won't meet with his constituents because he thinks they're fake bust-in individuals. He won't answer his phone. He won't be in his office for commentary. He refuses to listen to anybody that lives in his area, and I'm familiar with several of these. We actually talked a couple of weeks ago with Dr. Liam O'Mara, going for California's 42nd district against another one of these individuals who refuses to speak to their own constituents because they don't feel that they should be held accountable to the left side of their constituency because that's not who elected them or something. I'm not certain how they twist that in their brain, but
Yeah, so Pat Toomey is a former money manager for in Wall Street. I think he lived in Hong Kong and he managed the money of some Chinese billionaires. He founded a group called Club for Growth, which is like the most radical right
yeah, that sounds like some
group
capitalist bullshit.
economically. Yeah, yeah, and he won in 2016 by like percent or two. He won in 2010 by a percent or two here in Pennsylvania, and let's just say that he's the luckiest piece of shit I've ever seen, um, because everybody is fully engaged in defeating him, and we've got to wait until unfortunately 2022 before we get another crack at him.
Sure.
And as far as Pennsylvania, yeah, I mean, my specialization is more in nowadays is in the policy and the political side of organizing, which is a kind of behind the scenes type job where you manage uh, the candidate's relationship with the party, with outside groups like labor or Planned Parenthood, stuff like that. I've also done more traditional field organizing, which is the stuff that a lot of people are aware of, which is like knocking doors and making
Right.
phone calls and stuff like that, and managing volunteers. So, and then but because of my experience with policy, that's what gives me the ability to talk at length and as you described it, stream of consciousness about left stuff and do it with an empirical basis, right? Because there's two ways to argue for something like the minimum $15 minimum wage. You can say we nobody should work 40 hours a week and live in poverty. That's just wrong.
Right.
But there's another side to that, which is can we actually afford to have a society that pays everyone at least $15 minimum wage? Or will that cause a big disruption in jobs? And will that cause capitalism to crack? Will that actually end up hurting people? And I can explain to you exactly where the evidence is. And the answer is actually no. In fact, what we see in places that raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, unemployment actually goes down. There is, and the studies economically of the minimum wage raising it prove that that has basically no disemployment effect, and people don't cut hours in any significant degree. So what you end up seeing is transfer of money from the 1% to the lowest level of worker in our society. It's a active transfer of wealth from the richest to the poorest.
But
It's one of those policies that just plain works.
how do we convince people in America, which has the most deeply individualistic propaganda of anywhere that I know of? Mind you, I only live in America and are exposed to American medias, but I don't think there's a place that probably has a stronger threat of individualism apart from maybe Australia. And they're having some very similar problems to
I
us
think
politically
Australia
right
has like
now.
a $15 minimum wage.
Wow. But the point being, how do we convince people that think they don't deserve it, that it's in their best interests as the person who's already relatively comfortable in making it, that allowing people to survive is a good thing for them, actually?
Yeah, according to the minimum wage in Australia is 18.93 Australian dollars. So I think that
Okay.
transfers to around 14 to 15 US dollars.
Okay, so
Um, but no, like the idea that we don't deserve it. Well, I mean, that's the most ridiculous thing ever because think about the mechanics of how a McDonald's works as an example, right? Like,
I do.
does, does the owner of a McDonald's sit in the back and do work? Or is he some guy, a Jerry somewhere who drives from, every 6 months drives around to his McDonald's that he owns? And for the most part, the work that is done is accomplished by the employees in the location. They generate all the value.
Right.
And so when you look at, if you really want to get into it, but if you look at the costs of a McDonald's burger, labor is only about 20%. So even if you double those costs, it results in minuscule increase in the price of a burger. But for the life experience and the productivity, most importantly, of the people who make that $15 minimum wage, that is improved tremendously. And what we see is, all these different uh, positive benefits that happen from the $15 minimum wage or increase in the minimum wage. So people stay in their jobs longer. So companies aren't spending money searching for new employees. And when you stay in a job longer, you get better at it. So your productivity goes up. And then because you have extra money, you have less stress and your productivity goes up. And so we see all these measurable effects that have from somebody going from extreme poverty to something closer to a living wage and more security in their life results in and them becoming better workers. And so it's a virtuous cycle that improves. So as far as why do they deserve it? Well, the first is all the value comes from the worker. Number one. And so
Right.
they deserve more of the value that they create,
Well,
right?
but without the rich person buying the McDonald's, the building and the equipment, the capital, Mike, it wouldn't be there at all.
And you know what? I mean, I hear that argument, and just to give a more of a centrist, sock down point of view, no one is saying that profit well, some people are saying, but I'm not saying that profit should be banned. What I am saying though is that
I
society
am.
shouldn't subsidize your profit. Like nobody can survive on a $7 minimum wage. So what you require is us to subsidize that through food stamps, housing subsidies, Medicaid, healthcare coverage. And so you are actually only able to operate that McDonald's because of all the money the government is giving to your workers so that they could survive. And if the employee is making you $40, $50 in profit per hour, it's totally makes sense that we should claw back more of that, have less subsidies from the government, and more of the price of that employee's social reproduction should be borne by the person profiting from that person, if that makes sense. So like all those reasons, but fundamentally, like it just works. Like as we said before, a society with a minimum wage, a higher minimum wage, has lower unemployment, the economy is better, the workers are more productive, and everyone is happier. Like all these things are measurable. And so if you in any way care about what society looks like, that's why this policy is preferable. If you're just going to appeal to your emotions about, capital deserves all the profit, well, that society is going to be a backward society. There you go. That's my answer to that.
Sure, absolutely. A chatter in in chat is saying that they're also from Pennsylvania, and they think they're about three
Welcome.
to 4 hours from you. In I can't remember the capital. What's the capital of Pennsylvania that you live near?
The capital is Harrisburg.
Oh yeah, then I know that you live somewhere near there because I've read it in one of your profiles recently. Um,
Cool.
but they said 3 to 4 hours, so I assume they're probably Philly. What can they do to get involved? What organizations can you point somebody near in Pennsylvania towards? He's in Lancaster specifically. He's saying
So
to be able to get
Lancaster has
involved more.
probably one of the most exciting progressive movements in the entire country.
Oh,
So you're in luck. There's a group called Lancaster Stands Up, and it is organized by Bernie Kratz, dyed in the wool leftists who are taking back a more rural area and advancing progressive politics, and they've had tremendous success doing that. So I would look for Lancaster Stands Up, um, and try to get involved with them if you're there. To my
there you
local
go.
Pennsylvania brother.
What kind of changes have they done? What are they trying to do? Tell me about them.
So they are organizing. They have won, state legislative seats. They help push this campaign of a woman named by the name of Jess King, and she massively outperformed every other Democratic candidate. Unluckily for her, that district was pretty Republican, like R+20, and she got pretty close.
Oh wow,
But they, the city of Reading is in Berks, but it's pretty close to Lancaster. We have what else? Yeah, so they have done really well in winning those like state and local elections, and I think they're going to be one of the groups that helps deliver Pennsylvania for a progressive candidate in 2020. So I'd get involved now, and if you like like-minded people and you want to get your hands dirty, there's no better organization.
there you go. Lancaster stands or Lancaster stands up.
Lancaster stands up. Yeah,
Stands up. Excellent.
yeah.
That's good stuff. Uh, it, I keep thinking about personally because I'm all for the government doing what they're supposed to do, and I keep thinking about getting involved in one of my local Satanist temples actually, because they do a lot of free speech work specifically.
Mm.
As it relates to freedom of religion, and every time the state or the nation grants some ridiculous permission to Christians to be able to do a thing without thinking about the consequences of what they've done, they make certain to take advantage of the same exact loophole,
Yeah.
demanding a statute of Baphomet on town hall property, for example, is one of their biggest. I believe instead of granting that wherever what locality it was, they instead went ahead and changed the law and took the Ten Commandments out. But I love them. They're good people. They're sex positive people too, which is a thing that I care about a lot.
Oh,
But
definitely. Yeah. And that's an area that we could definitely educate more people on. In even in the leftist movement, there's people who have weird moralist, retrograde kind of views on sex work and on sex itself, and we got to work on that. So that's an important project that you're working on for
yeah,
sure.
well, I mean, we were a country that was founded by people that weren't stuffy enough for the British, so they kicked us out so that we could
Yeah.
go be assholes on our own. And we came and
Hmm.
we built log cabins and we lived sad, ascetic lives. And now the internet exists and we're being dragged into the world of sexual freedom and liberation, kicking and screaming.
Yeah, definitely.
So, what else? Tell us. Do you have a fun anecdote about Sam Sater, Mike? You must have at least one, right?
Oh boy. Let me think here. Huh. Putting me on the spot with Sam Cedar. Well, let's see here. Okay. So I'm going to advance what I consider to be a conspiracy theory, but
Oh.
I think I think it should be investigated by everyone in your chat, and make sure you at Sam Cedar when you do on Twitter. Is he is very close friends with H. John Benjamin, who is the creator of Bob's Burgers. He voices Archer on Archer. I
Yeah,
believe they
I
were
love
college
H. John
roommates.
Benjamin.
And H. John Benjamin has just recently published a memoir called "Failure Is an Option," and it describes a what he would call, and this is kind of dovetails to the conversation we were just having, his what he called a failed threesome. And if any of my moderators in the chat and they want to link this interview, this compilation, um, I would encourage that. Where I believe it might be possible that if we had the video, it's funnier than me recounting it. But
Okay. Jameson is saying
basically,
he's looking for the video. We just caught another host from Bad Bunny. Another 300 people joining us tonight. Everyone, welcome in. This is Central Committee, aka Mike from PA, an activist in Pennsylvania, fighting the leftist fight.
so hey guys, thanks for joining Central Committee on Twitch. Um, if you wanna throw me a follow, I think you guys can. You can't escape Bad Bunny, Mike. Dave says, "Oh, just okay, I got it." Well, yeah, thanks. Yeah, give a follow here. Give me a follow. That would be really helpful. We'll keep this leftist train rolling. Um, but yeah, the H. John Benjamin story about his failed threesome, I think is a funny story for Sam. And he's just the thing about Sam is he's just one of the kindest and most earnest people I've ever met.
Yeah,
And
he seems to be pretty chill. Uh, my journey into leftism is actually relatively new, and it coincides with a relative recent entry into caring about politics in any serious way. I think that's come for a lot of reasons, but yeah, I've started paying attention to him on YouTube because he's got one of the better produced teams for putting content out from the stuff that he's already producing, and
right.
he seems to be a really genuine person that so often is very confused by actions that are rooted in hatred and that sort of prejudice. And who's the guy that sits on the other mic that I should definitely know?
So
Pac-Man.
so so we have Michael Brooks, who is also a great lefty, who's the co-host. We have Jamie Peck, who is the host of her own thing called the Antifada. Um, and we have Matt Leck, who's a producer. Brendan Finn, who's another producer. I mean, and then there's a few other people that do work from a distance point of view. So it's quite the production. That's why it's got such great production value.
Right. Ha ha
um,
ha.
and Sam, Sam has been involved for and trying to advance the ball of the social democratic movement for a long time. And he comes from Air America. He was a Hollywood actor, director. He voices Hugo on Bob's Burgers. He also appeared in Sex and the City. I would recommend that.
Okay. Looks
Uh,
like your mod Jameson has pulled together the John Benjamin video.
oh,
How long is it?
oh,
Do you know?
and it's a couple minutes. It's a
Okay.
few minutes.
Do you want to watch it?
Sure. Let's
Okay.
advance this conspiracy theory a
Let's
little bit.
advance the
It's just
conspiracy theory, chat. Let's put up the failed threesome story from John Benjamin. I'm gonna mute you so that I won't be
sure.
able to hear you either because there's no other way for me to control it here, Mike.
Okay,
So
fair
if you want
enough.
to
Is
watch it
H. John
along
Benjamin's
too as
book?
well,
I'm watching it.
cool, excellent. Then I'll catch you in 3 minutes.
Sure.
I know how to mute you. I just be quiet.
Is H. John Benjamin's book? There's a character named Bart Cedar. Is this character meant to represent you, Sam? Was Sam the other guy in John Benjamin's Devil Triangle threesome story? I have no idea what you're talking about.
Now you've got a new memoir here. I like the title. It's called "Failure is an Option." You say you fail at a threesome.
The story is I was in college and I was in my dorm room with a girl and another guy from the dorm.
Yeah.
And he proposed that we have a threesome.
Blind items.
Yeesh.
Oh yeah. No, it's in his book.
It's disturbing.
I'm
not going to read it.
Remember him calling me.
Sab, I got to share this with you.
I don't remember who the woman was, but I do know who the guy was. Sometimes, folks, you make a mistake that you end up regretting for a long time. And so, John Benjamin, welcome to the program.
That's a very expected introduction. Best place.
Do you think there's going to be a lot of lawsuits? Because I feel like there might be.
I think there'll be like between 3 and 5 lawsuits.
And have you contemplated?
Maybe you. I wrote you're in the book, but I didn't name you. My book actually did start as a biography of you.
I hope you're aware that what you just said will be the basis of a lawsuit.
Maybe. I mean, come get me.
I'll come get you. I got no problem with that at all.
But
I forget.
This is your hammerhead style.
I should tell you,
appreciate it.
He disrobed immediately.
So, do you have your clothes on?
I have my clothes on. I'm like, I don't want to do this. And he's like, take your clothes off.
I've forgotten about a lot of things I did.
I'm not like opposed to returning to it because I do have a ton of notes on you and just the mess.
Does this go anywhere significantly from here, Mike? I feel like a solid case has been put together, and we're only about halfway through the video.
I mean, there is a punchline where he talks about. I think you give it another minute or two.
Okay,
if you don't mind.
we'll finish it. Okay, we'll do that.
Of course, I have intimate knowledge of your life. I've been there along with you since you were a troubled teen.
How old are you here?
I would say like 19.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, how honest are you about it? I mean, because you didn't do very well, if I remember correctly.
No, it's
Totally
So
panicked.
she comes back and she sees him like absolutely you could chip a tooth, and you're there just a shrinking violet. Okay.
It's a really, really short chapter. It's like a page and a half.
Then they started to make love, and I was just laying next to them.
So I do have you to thank for the title and the inspiration to the title, and the book itself is kind of a catharsis about sort of coming through your life back into mine and making it whole.
I'm Chuck Schumer, and I'm proud to
Okay,
approve this
that's
message.
I think that you have grounds for that particular conspiracy.
So, obviously the person isn't named.
Yes, the
Explicitly.
famous drinking game, the Devil's Triangle.
That's the famous drinking game. Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah. I hey, I'm sorry if that wasn't as entertaining for you as it is for me. But
well, I mean, clearly the closer you are to that, the funnier it's going to get. But that was a very well put together argument for this is what they're talking about.
So you asked, so that's my long answer.
Yeah, no. A couple of people were confused. I asked Mike for an anecdote about his dealings with Sam Seder, and he thinks that H. John Benjamin and Sam Seder had this failed threesome. He thinks that all of those things put together point to that being the case. And I would say that if there's no tomfoolery happening in that video, a strong argument has been put forth.
Well, I'm just saying I don't have any firsthand knowledge. This is just a conspiracy theory that I'm advancing for the purposes of my entertainment.
Right, and you think that everyone should at Sam Seder about this and let him know that the
and H. John Benjamin too. Why not?
Okay, sure. Maybe I could get H. John Benjamin on for my next interview. He's done some really low rent shit. I could He could slum it to Twitch. He absolutely could. He's that guy.
So yeah. So I hope everyone appreciated that video, because I find it hilarious. But there you go.
That's good. That derailed our momentum a little bit.
It did derail the momentum a little bit.
Right. So I see in pushpins behind you, you have a 3-digit number. What is the meaning of this dog whistle that you have behind you, Mike from PA?
Well, I'm going to answer this question really earnestly.
Okay.
And there is a movement here in Pennsylvania led by our newly elected Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman, who was a progressive who famous for supporting Bernie early in 2016, and he primaried our sitting lieutenant governor from the left, and he is helping to advance the cause of marijuana decriminalization and legalization here in Pennsylvania. And so, I take that seriously. It's an important movement for me and a lot of people. I have loved ones who use cannabis medicinally for chronic pain conditions and stuff like that. So, yeah, I'm just wanting to dog whistle to everyone that I really care about legalizing it. Yeah. So
wow, Jameson, one of your mods in my chat right now, showing his age, making a Clinton campaign trail joke. Have you ever inhaled?
I'll give the answer that Obama gave. Yeah, that was the point. Which shows how far we went.
Right. Yeah. No. It's the legal weedzation of the substance has certainly gone very far. I personally, this is a story I tell my chat very, very frequently. My parents were heavy abusers of the drug. To the point where I have a strong distaste for it. Like literally, the smell can be kind of post-traumatic triggering for me. In fact, and the wide legalization of it is starting to cause me some minor issues because it's more and more common that I end up encountering the smell of it. They were not good people. I haven't spoken to, well, my mother just died a year ago? I can't remember at this point. We don't know whether it was the car crash or the heart attack that came first. But it was sudden. She was mid 60s, early 70s. But yeah, I learned to only deal with them when they were high, because as much as there might not be any hard physical addiction to the substance, anything that you use to supplement your dopamine becomes addictive and habit forming if you use it habitually enough. And my parents were let's not get too heavy, but I don't talk to them anymore, and haven't regularly for a long time.
Yeah. There are always unintended consequences with these type of things, and I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I'm perfectly fine with anybody using it, whatever. I have no qualms against recreational use of it. It's just, I have this personal bugaboo that I have to deal with because the wide legalization of it makes it so much more common that I encounter it, especially in social situations, which gets complicated sometimes.
Yeah, I'm not much of a drinker anymore, because of the same type of things that you're saying, in my own history. So, but I've learned to cope with that. You order a club soda with lime. And you deal with that. Also, when you get older, chat, drinking, it's harder on you the next morning. When I was 20, I could I could set my alarm for 6 and I'd be fine. Now it's like 4 p.m. and I'm still like shuffling around after I drink. So I try to avoid that these days.
It's the old stripper trick. You get poured a water while they get poured a vodka.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how much time did you spend on the pole before you became a political activist, Mike?
I'm not. We had this discussion last night in my stream
Really?
about not that particularly, but about certain endowments that I lack.
Oh,
We had
wow. That's very
Clementine.
personal. You seem to keep a
No,
pretty professional
no, no, no,
sheen.
no, 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 no. What I'm first of all, I'm fine in the front, but in the back, let's just say that I've got the white man's disease,
Okay.
where it's very flat.
Sure.
And Andre, or Cormentine, as he's known on Twitch, I was arguing for universal butt implants. It should be part of Medicare for all because we should advance. I'm what you know as Jameson is right. I'm now a capitalist. I believe that everybody should have the right to a nice plump booty if they desire. It shouldn't just be determined by your genes and the luck of your birth. You know, we all should be able to enjoy a round booty, and it would just advance. If you think about it, think about that kind of society, right? You would want to live in that society where it's more equal
Well,
distribution of booty. You know,
would we? Let's take this to one extreme or another. Do you do much sci-fi? Because
I
the
like
two works
sci-fi,
I'm looking
sure.
for specifically here would be Gattaca. That would be the extreme capitalist version of what we're talking about. Or we can talk about Heinlein's Harris and Bergeron. Are you familiar with that one?
I'm not familiar with the second, but
Okay,
obviously
that
Gattaca I
one
am.
I can give you a brief plot synopsis. Basically, they're eventually, because the left gets their way, because Heinlein is a pretty famous fasci asshole who believes that only those who have served in the military should have full citizenship, etc. He envisioned a society in which the government created the handicapper general, whose job was to take anyone who had a gift, a special ability, or any ability to exceed beyond that of the worst of society. They had to be handicapped in some way, physically, emotionally, etc. If you were beautiful,
That's the dumbest premise I've ever heard.
right. And so this story is about how there's this one guy who eventually is such an ubermensch that he takes off his shackles and leads the exceptionalist revolution against the oppressive regime that is trying to make
Holy
everyone
fuck.
equal.
That's like an
So
entire book of strawmans.
pick pick your poison
What
on
the
whether you
fuck?
prefer the capitalist or the
Dumbest fucking thing I've
extreme
ever heard. Fuck
version
Heinlein
of
sucks.
that, and how does that interact with the capitalist utopia that you're
All I can
describing?
say is I don't think first of all, I'm not it's not a booty mandate, okay? It
Okay.
is you know, if you decided that you would wanted access to
Maybe it
that
is
kind of
Vonnegut. Thank you,
modification,
Marx. I think it's Heinlein
um,
though.
that's ridiculous. First of all, can we just talk? Like, how do even Marx was not like that type of egalitarian. Like nobody. That's not a position on the left that we're going to destroy the exceptional thinkers or athletes or whatever. And we all know that when the Soviet Union was competing against the United States, they did quite well in athletic competition. So this is not some sort of like impulse on the left. That's
Right.
not what equity is. Um, and it's like one of the only jokes the right has. Like the one is attack helicopter,
What?
and the other is like
I distinctly
bringing everyone
remember
else
them
down.
having at least 3 jokes, Mike.
Fuck. Okay. Yeah.
Because
And
we've got attack helicopter, we've
mhm,
got triggered,
mhm.
and the one that we just went over. That's at least 3.
There you go. I mean, the right is getting better at comedy. We're quaking in our boots. Um, yeah. So yeah, that's this. I just want to say this was. I haven't fully fleshed out the full platform of the capitalists, but I do believe that I have been afflicted, and my condition should be treated. That's all I'm saying.
That's fair.
Mm.
I don't know whether if I ever lose my weight that I will end up losing my body. You may be able to convert me eventually, because but at
So
my
in other
current
words,
size,
you're just another leftist who needs to be mugged by reality, right?
yes. Yes, the harsh reality of how things may end up treating me, et cetera, et cetera. So
Okay,
yeah,
fair enough.
let's straw man ourselves for a fun exercise, Mike.
Sure.
What's the darkest utopia you can imagine if we get everything we want?
Like what are the bad things that I think could happen?
Right. What are the complaint points if our utopia of leftist egalitarian treatment comes to pass? What are the grandpas of that era going to complain about how horrible that is to their grandchildren who understand already how disconnected from reality they actually are?
So do you mean what will be the new progress of what will be what the progressives of our utopia? What will they be arguing for to dismantle?
I
Or
was
do
more
you
looking
mean
for the opposite of that. What will the regressives, after we achieve what we've had, end up complaining about once they've
oh
seen
god.
the reality of everyone being treated equitably?
Yeah, that's always a difficult one because it's amazing what reactionaries can assume it's just the way it works when they were fighting tooth and nail against it, you know, when it was actually happening. It's sort of like the racial justice dynamic, right? Like
Right? Whew.
how many Republicans cite Martin Luther King, right? And but the conservative movement, including some of the same papers that do, like say for example, the National Review, which is a conservative magazine, was arguing for segregation and that Southern institution um, while the civil rights movement was going on. And then after it happens, now they're like, well, racism's over. They have equality under the law. What more do you want?
Right.
So what would they be arguing? I tend to think that the risks are a further retrenchment of us versus them narratives. Um, when we build solidarity within our nation state, which is how we operate with politics in the 21st century, we're still in that model. Um, Americans do have this kind of the concept of American exceptionalism, right? That we're some sort of blessed people that's better than the rest. And if we build a strong social democracy, there will be the impulse to exclude will, I think, might continue to grow,
Really?
right? Yeah. And I don't mean within our society. I mean like with immigration as a particular example.
Right. So
Um,
you mean, I want to make sure I understand, you think that it might be a thing that comes to pass after we attain some level of exceptionalism again through something other than an accident of being the only country that wasn't bombed into oblivion,
right.
that if our socialist paradise occurs, we might at that point want to exclude others from it,
I think
based
that's what the
on where they come
reactionaries
from
would
or
do.
how they look?
Yeah, I think that's what the reactionaries would do. You
Okay.
you asked me to like predict the fight of the future, and that's one of those things because one of the cognitive biases that we have as humans is fear of loss, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's disproportionate fear of loss. So like
Yes. As a
if we
sales
have
trained individual, I'm very familiar with this.
right, and so one of the ways that you would build a reactionary movement, and you see this in Europe now with what's happening with the fascists in France and in some of the Scandinavian countries where the far right is rising. Um, their way of saying is, look at these immigrants, look at these outsiders. They're going to take away the benefits and the state that we as Frenchmen or we as Swedes has built up, and we can't handle the strain, right? And so we've got to protect what we have by excluding the other. And I think even in America, the one thing that we do is whether or not we actually believe it. One of our myths is the idea of the melting pot, right? Like anybody can come here and become an American, and Trump is part of the movement to end that concept.
Yeah.
And where we become kind of you'll forgive me because it's been a while since I've been in the academy, but I think the distinction is between is phrased as a difference between romantic and civic nationalism, right?
Okay.
So America is a civic nationalist nation, which is to become an American, you have to share a certain set of beliefs, a belief in democracy, the Bill of Rights, freedom of speech, etc. It's not an identity of blood and soil. Whereas romantic nationalism is a mythos of about like a people from a particular place, and that place is like got a holy sacred element to it, right? And the people that are native to that area are separate and apart and special from people from other places. And so Trump is about creating that romantic nationalism surrounding a white identity and quote Western civilization or whatever construction they build. So I see that trend continuing as a strategy.
Okay. So if reviving the exceptionalist myth of America is what the right is doing, should we be attempting to craft our own mythos?
Yeah, I think that's definitely necessary. And we also have to have an internationalist eye because I don't believe that you can have progress in one nation. We've got to build, and this is one of the things that Bernie Sanders is doing that is so important to me, is creating this progressive international. The idea of mutual aid and support for leftists. Am I still with you?
Yeah,
Okay.
my internet is dipping out at the moment, but it
Okay.
is recovering right now already.
Yeah. I just saw a loading screen.
Yeah, it seems to do this once a night or so for a little while. I would expect repeat instances, but I don't have
I
any
think you're
control
good.
over it.
Yeah, I think you're good. And so like, building that, like, between Jeremy Corbyn and Bernie Sanders and Syriza in Greece or whatever other organizations that the socialists and progressives in Portugal, the social democratic parties of Sweden and Germany, and building this kind of like concept of a progressive movement that transcends borders. And I think that's actually what is the opportunity. Is the United States has really put a lid on left-wing movements around the world. We've been a right-wing reactionary um, hegemon that's gone around and fenced in the possibilities around the world. And
Right.
if we take our boots off the necks of leftist movements around the world, I think you'll see kind of an awakening. And that's like one of the greatest opportunities we have is putting someone in like Bernie Sanders is allowing leftism to flourish around the world. As by the way, the same thing has happened with Trump. As Trump was elected, fascism has flourished around the world.
Uh, you
And
you
so,
said that literally half a second after somebody in chat did.
oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. Sorry for the abstract
Oh, you're fine.
ideas, Jameson. But
But
Mark,
yeah, some at least a couple of people in chat asked how to get involved in activism in a broader sense. We talked specifically about for Lancaster, PA, but this one might be a quicker question before we go into that because that's your area of expertise, and I know you're going to ramble for a minute. Why isn't Marx considered a part of Western civilization and thought?
well, it's just, I mean, that's a geopolitical consequence of where socialist movements rose. There was like a desire to orientalize the socialist movement. With Russia and China, it's part of the tactics of making it an unacceptable way of looking at the world is you make it seem like it's foreign, right?
Right.
And so, objectively, Marx is part of the Western tradition. I mean, he's German and he wrote a lot of his stuff in London. Like of course, he's part of
Right.
the European tradition of thought. But so that's my answer to that.
Cool. But yeah, so this is a question that I should be asking, honestly, because I should be doing more. I'm not certain that I can go out and do actual Antifa action because with my body, would probably be more of a liability on the line than I would be useful. What can we do to get more involved in our localities? What should we be looking for in an organization? What ways are there other than helping stump for Democratic candidates, especially for those of us who don't think that the Democratic establishment goes far enough?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that every individual has to approach. Is, there's two primary ways to advance the cause. The first is like those independent structures of power we talked about. So those are, groups like DSA, groups like environmental or activist organizations, um, other progressive groups, and they vary around the country. Here in Pennsylvania, we have a group called Keystone Progress. There are similar groups all around the country. Um, if you're more into electoral politics, I would recommend groups like Our Revolution, the Progressive Change Campaign Committee. Um,
And these
and
would largely be people trying to change the
those would be
electorate in
those are the
general, right?
yeah, those are the electoral side. And as far as so yeah, did I answer that enough? I mean, like, and by the way, let me say this. And obviously helping out Bernie too is very helpful.
Sure.
There is a lot, and as far as like direct actions, like what you're talking about, counter protests. There are other activist groups, like if you really care about immigration, um, the premier left organization on that is a group called Make the Road. I don't know if they have a fully national presence, but I know they have a presence in New York, Pennsylvania, and a few other places. I think out west, closer to the border. Um, you have There's a myriad of organizations that you can go to that will help you organize around the principle that is animating to you. What makes you passionate? What will
Sure.
you not burn out doing? If broad left wing organizing, like there are groups. That's why like DSA is a really great group because it's an umbrella organization, and they help. They organize with other progressive groups to do those direct action. And as far as like direct actions, counter protests, being connected to those groups will get you in that stream. The one thing I would say to people on the left is you should practice self protection, right? And I don't want to give right wingers too much of a easy access to people who are doing exactly what you're talking about,
Right.
and risking themselves, right? So being involved in those organizations, if you're more interested in that kind of confrontational action that you're talking about, which is very necessary, they will, once you earn your stripes and pay your dues, those opportunities will present themselves.
Okay.
And electorally, like those groups, Our Revolution, Progressive Change Campaign Committee, your statewide groups like Keystone Progress, will focus you on candidates who are not just Democrats, generic Democrats, but rather those who are really trying to move the ball forward.
So somebody in chat actually mentions call your local Mexican music radio station if you see an ICE van, ICE, Immigration's Customs Enforcement. Broader than that, and here's a question that I'd love to hear you talk on for a minute. Here in Chicago, it's regular practice from the recent raids for us to call our aldermen's offices. Aldermen, for anybody that doesn't deal with those sorts of systems, are basically like neighborhood mayors. Basically, there are little city representatives that speak with the mayor and the council directly. Um, how dysfunctional have things gotten, and what's the way out of the fact that we are calling our local government to deal with problems that the federal government is creating and we largely agree is harmful to our communities?
Chicago is a really great place for leftist organizing. I believe there's been a number of like socialist aldermen elected in the most recent election.
Yes,
And
I do believe we got our first gay
there was
black
like 5 or
woman.
6.
Was one of like, yeah, it went very well in our most recent elections.
And also, like, you know, in your area in particular, again, Dan Lipinski, like, definitely is like gotta be is the number one target that progressives have for a really evil right-wing Democrat that would significantly push the Democratic Party leftward if you could get rid of him. Would be huge. Yeah, you know, that's the thing. Unfortunately, this is, you know, elections have consequences. And when you put the apparatus of the state in the hands of fascists, they are going to fulfill their promises. They're going to use the state power to ethnically cleanse this country. That's the goal. So, you know, right now we're on the deportation stage. We're on this, you know, the dehumanization stage. But unless we work quickly, you know, this is not going to stop.
I would argue that we
Like,
have gone past that step on the ethnic cleansing pyramid, whatever it is that we call that particular structure. I would say that we are definitely into the start murdering them indiscriminately phase, because we keep seeing over and over again notices of these things happening. Our most Congress people are reporting on their firsthand experiences, and we are discounting them entirely.
One of the things that one of the lies that the right wing puts out is that it is based purely on immigration status, and we know from countless examples that American citizens have been arrested and detained for periods for weeks, if not longer, based on a suspicion solely rooted in their ethnic identity. And racial and ethnic profiling is legal in the United States. People do not understand this. They deny it, but it absolutely is a permissible part of investigatory practice in the United States. And ICE in particular are using ethnic identity as a way to target individuals for detention, including American citizens.
Right.
And furthermore, you know, you have American citizens with spouses who are who are undocumented or in the process of transitioning from undocumented to legal. And it's not automatic. If you marry someone, they're not automatically granted a green card. You have to go through an administrative process, which takes time, money, savvy, and an ability to navigate the bureaucratic state. And so you will have Americans with their spouse, with American citizen children, losing primary breadwinners to these ICE raids. They're not just targeting criminals. They're not just targeting people who represent some sort of threat to the social fabric. They're going after people who work in factories.
Yeah.
You know, in Alabama, they raided a chicken processing plant and took 700 workers off the line. How does that help our society? It doesn't help our society in any significant way. All it does, and so at the local schools, there were children who now couldn't go home, who are American citizens, because they don't have a parent or guardian there ready. How are we as a society significantly improved by that? Why is ICE wasting resources and time disrupting and destroying communities like that?
Yeah. So I feel like it more directly led onto the last point that you had made, but regarding local action, do you have any thoughts on what happened in Portland over the weekend?
Yeah, you know, I haven't been following this too closely with the Patriot Prayer Rally. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, the guys rolling up in modified riot buses, and the fact that the mayor is allowing them individual access to the bridge. Like, I've only caught most of what Twitter's thrown at me, which I'm sure, you know, is the stuff that's painting them in the worst light, but white nationalist organizing isn't exactly not in the worst light to begin with. But yeah, I've caught word of a good deal of it.
Yeah, so I mean, from what I understand, Patriot Prayer is not full of Portland natives. It's a intentional national organization trying to come into a community to impose fascist violence. And one of the most concerning things, but something that we should face as leftists, is that there are a tremendous number of sympathetic people within the police department, and they rise at a pretty senior levels within the police department of the Portland Police. So the one thing you should expect is that fascist organizing will always receive a sympathetic view from local law enforcement. And it's amazing how restrained Antifa has been in the face of provocation, violence, murder, and I don't know if I would necessarily call it state sanctioned, but state support for these fascist pieces of shit. So yeah, I listen, do our best, to organize these communities. I think counter protests are very effective at disrupting fascist organizing and intimidating them away. So, I wish our brothers and sisters the best of luck in confronting this like outsider influence. And they're targeting Portland for a reason, because they know Portland is a progressive city. Right? They want to impose their
Portland
fascist.
has a very strong history of white nationalism that goes back all the way to its founding.
When
so
Washington
I think that it's
blacks,
the perfect
right?
battleground for this, because it has those two separate cultures very much already at each other's throats.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I believe Washington State actually in its charter excluded black settlers by law originally. So you couldn't, as a black person, go to Washington territory and like settle land, and it would not be recognized. That's just a little historical fact for everybody going, what's with the black people? Why have they pulled themselves up by their bootstraps?
Right. Good old bootstraps. Literally, etymologically, a phrase that was created to talk about how absurd that particular concept itself was.
That's the thing that's funny. Well, that's the thing about right-wingers, is when they're made fun of, they're so dense. The thing you make fun of them with becomes adopted. It's like the horse and sparrow theory or the trickle down theory. Like those were descriptors used to make fun of a totally ridiculous concept. Um, horse and sparrow was how trickle down economics was originally lambasted as. The idea is, if you just stuff a horse so full of oats, some of them will pass undigested through its digestive tract, and sparrows, which is basically us, will be able to pick through the horse shit and eat some grains of oats. And then that evolved to the trickle down theory, which we all have the appropriate visualization of how that works.
Yeah, that works out very well. I think we've proven historically. I definitely had another question that I was going to point at you that I have lost just all of a sudden. Your butter horse distracted me.
Well, it's definitely, it's really been enjoyable to talk to you, and if you have more for me, well, let me have it. If not,
chat, hit us with your questions. There haven't been nearly as many questions as when we've had other guests in for interviews, and we've got so many more people in here than usual. So,
see, the one thing is, I encourage people to listen to my just droning lectures.
Sure.
Obama sucks, Jameson. Don't get me started. Don't you dare do that. Let me see if I can find anything in here.
One of the chat wants you to define the difference between a dividend payout and a stock buyback.
Okay, guys. Okay.
That being
by the way,
for anybody that's not in on this joke, he and Destiny yelled at each other last night about investment structures and
I could
stock
have done better
buybacks for like 2 hours.
framing the issue. It's important to frame the issue. Is that my point of view is not a left-wing fringe view. It's actually a mainstream Democratic position. I believe Chuck Schumer is the co-sponsor of a bill banning stock buybacks. So this is not some idea that's some sort of left-wing radical fringe position. There's a lot of economists who support the idea that stock buybacks are distortive and are damaging in the long term. And frankly, like there isn't really, I mean, there isn't all that much support other than like kind of the standard conservative view that we live in capitalism, so the companies get to do what they want, kind of arguing. Central committees, do you support abolishing the filibuster? Bernie doesn't. This is from I'm really important. Obviously we should obviously we should abolish it. Bernie's wrong on that. Yeah. The filibuster is ridiculous.
This is Grandpa being too used to his favorite stories on TV, I would say. Like, eventually we have to move on from them. The filibuster is not being used in good faith at this point and needs to be changed.
Unbe, I'm not sure I follow you. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by changing necessary for Bernie to capture the primary? Yeah, expand on that.
I mean, I think he's just asking because he said even assuming one is necessary. Like, do you think Bernie is likely to capture the primary at this point? And if not, what one or two changes would you, if you were his campaign manager, what would you tell him are the biggest two things, let's say, that you would want him to shift on a little bit?
I think the biggest mistakes he made in 2016 was excessive focus on the early states. And so when we because that's, what happens is you look at Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina and Nevada for like a full 18 months. Like those are the most important races because they're the next races. And then you start having races every couple weeks. You know what I mean? And so you spend 18 months organizing those 4 places. And then now you have to transition to organizing 46 more states. So, I think they are looking forward to the future for a longer term campaign this time around. So that's like the biggest change I would make. It's just like a tactical or strategic advice, like activate your organization and focus further on than just the first 4 states. That would be the biggest change, that number one change. And honestly, like, I hate to say this because it makes me sound like a Bernie stan, but I've been really impressed with his focus on, he's been accused of being a class reductionist in the past, but more focusing on an intersectional approach toward politics, focusing on racial and social justice issues in a more nuanced and effective manner. And I think he's really done a good job with that. The other is we've got to destroy Joe Biden.
Sure. One person in chat asks, what's your call on what's going to happen in the primary and ultimately 2020 presidentially?
So, I mean, I'll give you my Bernie path to victory, and then I'll give you like an alternative thing that I think is going to happen. Like,
okay.
Bernie path to victory has to do with if you look at the state of the electorate right now, and this is something that I've talked about on my stream and VODs before. I have a YouTube channel that I just started under Central Committee where I posted one video, which is like my 2-hour discussion with Destiny on Bernie's electability. So I go into this with more depth. But basically, if you look at Biden supporters' number one second choice is Bernie Sanders. And so the reason why they're supporting Biden over Bernie at this point is because of the conventional wisdom that Biden is more electable than Bernie.
Right.
But it's not that they support Biden and they don't like Bernie. They like both. They're just leaning towards Biden because of a calculation that he might be slightly better against Trump.
Sure.
So what Bernie needs to do, the best way to smash the idea of electability is when that candidate starts losing elections. And so I think if Bernie wins Iowa and New Hampshire, and I think he's very well positioned to do both, that will create a momentum of its own, a bandwagon effect. And I think a lot of the progressive vote and a lot of people who are interested in electability can settle behind Bernie, and he can create that kind of electable coalition. So expect him to win Iowa, New Hampshire. I think he'll finish solidly in South Carolina, and then I expect him to win Nevada. And winning 3 of the first 4 states, nobody has ever won Iowa, New Hampshire, and not gone on to win the nomination in either party. So that's typically considered to be like the end of the game if you can win both. So I think he's in a very good position to do that.
And how absurd is it that the end of the game is the start of it?
Yeah. Long primary fights are pretty unusual.
Yeah.
Usually they end by Super Tuesday at the latest.
So Bastiat asked, do you support unfettered immigration? Do you think there should be limits? I think open borders are a good thing. Not sure what the left perspective is on the issue. I can say that the extreme left opinion is that borders as a concept and nations entirely should be eliminated wholesale. But that's a long-term goal, obviously. What's your personal opinion on borders right now, Mike?
So there's 2 ideas. The first is we have to recognize that nations are inherently a false construct, and the states that support them, right? But on the other hand, like there are a few things that we do need to have control of. One of them is just we want to make sure that products are produced in as fair a regime as possible. I'd like to see a fair trade regime enacted. I think free movement of peoples is the ultimate goal. The United States can accommodate hundreds of millions of more people. This is a large, empty country for the most part, and we can accommodate more immigration. I think there's kind of a more centristy approach. Now, when I say centrist, I really mean between the far left and the progressive left, where we,
that's a delightful thought at that word being applied in that way.
Yeah, where obviously, due to the distribution of resources in the world today, a lot of people will want to come to this country, and we should encourage that in a controlled manner as possible, where we maintain our structures of enforcement of things like labor and environmental regulations. We should encourage a fair trade regime. A lot of the reason that people migrate to our country, and Bernie has talked about this, is because we destabilize their countries.
Right.
For example, in Central America, the caravans are happening because we supported coups and destabilized these countries in Central America and allowed corrupt, oligarchic, organized crime families to take over those governments. And so people just don't feel safe in their own country, and we're to blame. Same thing with the Syrian crisis, right? That's due to the invasion of Iraq, destabilizing Iraq, creating space for ISIS, right? And so the Syrian crisis is directly related to our actions in foreign policy. There's also an element of climate change causing droughts in Syria and crop failures and hunger. So it's like a 3-pronged answer. The first is, we need to maintain environmental and labor protections. We need to have a fair trade regime. We need to stop interfering in countries, because people don't want to move to a country where they don't know the language and they don't know anyone and they have no familial connections. For the most part, people want to stay where their families are from. And so we can do all of those things. And frankly, like, as far as to answer this question more glibly, we can have an open immigration policy that brings in people without causing any adverse effects. And a lot of the problems that we face with illegal immigration is due to the fact that illegal immigrants are treated as second-class citizens, and they're not able to use our laws to do stuff like enforce labor rules or go after criminals, and so they get used and abused and exploited.
Yeah. Small point, because I'm a data nerd sometimes, and I think this information might have come from the second Freakonomics book, if I recall. People like to live where their families live so much that you can predict red or blue voting in the South by where the river basins used to lay, because that's where plantations were built. That's where slaves were moved to. They never left those areas, and black people vote predominantly democratically. And so you can look at these fertility maps of the southern United States, and they predict with alarming regularity how. Yeah.
I've heard that before. Definitely. I know it. I can't remember what this study was, but I think I just read that pretty recently.
Right. I love that sort of data. It's just weird connections between things.
So what's more questions?
Yeah, we got plenty of questions here. A lot of them came in when we called for them. Waffles in chat asks, and this is a big one for me: platforming. Do you think it's ethical for Democratic candidates or other leftists to go onto Fox News and provide a legitimacy to the narratives that they build there?
All right, so that's a little bit of a loaded question.
Sure.
And let me talk to you about this way. And I think we've had a test of this with this campaign. So Bernie Sanders both went on Fox News for a town hall, and he just recently appeared on Joe Rogan's podcast. And both of those pieces.
And now he seems to be polling ahead of where he was. Is the important data there, right?
So it's important for us. So those of us who are politically engaged and active, this is something I tell people on the first day whenever I'm doing a training, is that you are a weirdo. Okay, you think about politics about 1,000 times more than the average person, and so when you talk about Fox News and Joe Rogan being problematic, you are 100% correct. And if I could get rid of Fox News tomorrow, we talked about it earlier. Go to your grandma's house and use parental controls to block Fox News. That being said, when Bernie Sanders went on the Fox town hall, he was able to have an uninterrupted stream where he talked directly to voters. And there's a principle in psychology called the mere exposure effect. And that is when a certain percentage of people are exposed to an idea, they're going to adopt it. And he's talking to people that are probably never been exposed to his arguments and his into his beliefs in a unobstructed fashion. So if he can hijack their platform, look at it like that. He's hijacking their platform to spread leftist ideas. And I don't think Bernie Sanders has actually gone out there and forced or supported Fox News, except in the most strictest sense of using their platform for his ideas. I think that's a win. And I think if you look at Joe Rogan and read the comment section of that Joe Rogan podcast, wow, that's the only Joe Rogan podcast I'll tell you to read the comment section in. It seems like he's persuaded a lot of people. I think it's actually worked. And as an organizer, I'm comfortable going into uncomfortable spaces, problematic spaces, and I know that I have that privilege and I have that experience, and I don't expect you, especially those of you who are vulnerable and those of you who are in communities where you need to practice self-protection, or you have had bad experiences and you have where you need to just protect yourself. That's fine. I'm the warrior. I'm the person, and that's what Bernie's job is too. It's our job to go in those uncomfortable spaces and try to persuade people that for some people they just can't talk to. And I wouldn't expect you to. But if you're one of those people who thinks that you can do it, I would encourage you to show solidarity with those who can't and do the work. So I hear your concern. If it became like a thing where here's the thing, here's the final sentence, and everybody knows that's a famous quote for me, which is, if you're going on Tucker Carlson and you're accepting his frame of hatred against immigrants, for example, you're a piece of shit. But if you go on Fox News and you push leftist agenda and you don't do things like support Tucker Carlson, that's a different story entirely. So if my answer to that, I hope, expressed enough nuance.
Sure. And I want to stress that what Mike was saying there is, if you're the opposite of a person who needs to be protecting themselves, if you're a middle-aged white dude, use what you have, use that gift that has been given to you to get out there, be in the way, speak to people that wouldn't listen to women, that wouldn't listen to the disabled, that wouldn't listen to blacks, and talk to them about this shit, because they will listen to you in spaces where nobody else will be listened to. And it's maddening to have to say it, but white men hold the most power in this ability, and they're going to for the foreseeable future. Please get out there and do everything you can.
Right.
Marx Leninist asked several things, but one of them being, do you have any thoughts on court packing, what Democratic strategies for the Supreme Court might be, and do you agree with Sanders' plan to rotate judges? Is this the plan of expanding the number of judges and then assigning the partisan judges to each one with a... That sounds like a stupid idea to me, but let's hear your thoughts.
So the court packing, that term refers back to a time in the 30s when FDR was elected, and in the first 100 days, he passed, I believe it was 13 major pieces of legislation, which is why we refer to the concept of the first 100 days. So, like, think of Obamacare and the scope and scale of that, and then do 12 more things. That was FDR's first 100 days. And the reaction to that, much change being enacted all at once, was a legal one. And the conservatives on the Supreme Court invalidated and declared unconstitutional a lot of the programs that FDR enacted. And this is in the middle of the Great Depression with 30% unemployment. And by the way, FDR had won such a landslide that the Democrats controlled, I believe, 70% of the House seats and 70% of the Senate. So there was a total mandate, the likes of which we've never seen. And his reaction was, and a lot of the judges were like 80 years old or 70 years old. And his reaction was, well, I'm going to add judges to the Supreme Court because we have the authority to do that. The number of judges on the Supreme Court is just set by federal law. And it's been changed in the past. Like 9 is not in the Constitution. We've had all sorts of different numbers of Supreme Court judges.
Right.
More and less. It's been 9 for most of the 20th century, but that there's no hard and fast rule. We can change it if we want to. And largely people consider that to be a failure because he was brushed back and people decided not to do that. But the pressure that he exerted on the Supreme Court resulted in them backing off of declaring all his bills unconstitutional, and they started giving a bunch of decisions supporting the programs that he was passing and giving him constitutional authority. So let's move that up to the present day. We face a slightly different situation because the Republicans have stolen a Supreme Court seat. And that's in effect like 2 seats, because instead of having a Democrat or a left-leaning judge, you have a right-leaning judge. So that is that's a swing of 2 total.
Right.
And so what should we do in that response to that? And I tend to be of the mind that packing the court would be a rational thing to do. That said, it may not be necessary. For example, Clarence Thomas is getting up there in age, and if he were to leave the court, there's also 2 progressive judges that are 80 years old or older. That would give the next Democratic or the next president in the next 4 years probably will have 3 appointments to make. And that would, if it was a progressive, that would give the Supreme Court a 5-4 left-leaning lean of young progressives, none of which are over the age of, I believe, 50 or 55. So they're going to be there for the foreseeable future. We're going to have a left-leaning court. And so that's a possibility. So if that possibility happens, then I don't think you need to pack the court. But if Clarence Thomas is replaced by a Trump appointee, or God forbid, one of the other left-leaning judges dies or leaves the court, then it may be just necessary tactically. And I understand the institutional arguments against it, but we can't afford to have a Supreme Court that just invalidates everything we do. I mean, if we want progressive change, it may be necessary. And here's the thing: if something is legal to do, and eventually the Republicans will do it.
Right.
Nobody had ever held a Supreme Court seat open for a full year until they did it, and they did it because it was legal for them to do. So if that ability is there for the Republicans, eventually it will be deployed. So we should, know that and consider it. And the value of a progressive Supreme Court cannot possibly be measured in a few paragraphs.
That's, I think, a fair statement. Novatoast asks something that I think I'm going to just real quick. If Bernie doesn't get the nomination, do you think he should still run? If he doesn't get the nomination, he's not going to. He didn't in 2016. Why would he do it on arguably a far more election? I don't think that even needs to be.
I mean, all I'll say is I don't think he'll do it.
Right.
It would depend on what happens. For example, Bernie is a big fan of Elizabeth Warren, and he always has been. So if she were to win, I think he would absolutely have no problem.
I would see no issue with it. He'd almost certainly give official support to her.
Right, he would. But if there's some sort of shenanigans that happens at the convention that's anti-democratic, which is a possibility, although a remote one, I wouldn't focus on that. I would just be aware of it. Then who fucking knows what will happen? But I tend to think that Bernie, like he did in 2016, will support the eventual Democratic nominee. So I think that's kind of just a waste of time.
Yeah. So here's one from one of my very regular extreme left individuals in my chat,
Sure.
asking, what's the path to reconciling that a socialist government, probably in theory, wants to protect local labor, which might be read as anti-immigration, and the general leftist view of being pro-immigration? I would think very quickly, without much nuance, that if somebody wants to immigrate and become a member of a local community, at that point, they should be treated as such. But maybe you have something a little bit deeper to say about that.
I think that contradiction, it's a historical one, but not necessarily something that has to happen. So what capitalists have done in the past is they have taken vulnerable, exploited communities when there was labor action happening at, say, a factory, and they would go down to exploited communities and be like, I will pay for your move and I will give you a job. And they would gather all these surplus labor, right? And then they would import them into a community and have them cross a picket line, right? And then that would cause that tension that we're talking about, is a group of workers come in and they violate the picket line, which is the most sacred thing in leftist spaces, and you should never do it. If you're ever confronted with a picket line, you don't cross it ever, and it's an unforgivable offense. So don't do it. And so when you you have that historical exploitation. So my response to that is to prevent that from happening in the first place. How do you do that? Well, we can have programs called sectoral unions, or basically every worker is automatically in the union. And so there is no way for a capitalist to exploit that marginalized community and create those tensions. So if a immigrant comes in this country and the first thing next to their green card, they get a union card, there's no problem. So it's a structural response to that dilemma that you're talking about, which is created by capitalists to disrupt solidarity in the working class. There's my answer.
Sure. Here's a question from Lycheens, a new regular for me. How many people do you think that express strong opinions on immigration actually know how immigration in our country works? They say
0%.
Yeah, they're on the 6 month of waiting for their husband's visa.
0%. 0%.
0%. Really? You think it's that stark?
I mean, okay. I mean, I'm sure 10% of people know their ass from the hole in the ground on immigration policy, but for the most part, Nobody has they have no fucking idea what they're talking about. This is a concept this is a phrase that I believe I coined, called right-wing folktales, where a lot of right-wing beliefs are constructed about these stories that don't actually exist. They're just a folktale. And the concept is like, oh, my great-grandparents or my grandparents followed the law. Why can't people follow
Ellis
the law?
Island doesn't work like that anymore.
Right. And they think like that there is an Ellis Island or there is some sort of mechanism to get in line to immigrate to this country. There is not. I'll say that again. There is not. There is an immigration lottery, which it's exactly like it sounds. You put your name into a hat and a very few people are chosen. And by the way, Trump is trying to abolish that. And then the other alternatives are you have a relative who's here already, or you marry someone who's an American, or you have a job and you get an H-1B visa where they say that there are no Americans that they can find to do the job, and so they need you. And then your position in society is dependent upon your employer. Do you think there's any exploitation problems there? Right? So they have no fucking clue what they're talking about. And then there's a refugee program that we have, where people can present at ports of entry and make applications for treaties that the United States has signed for refugees. And honestly, we admit way less refugees than our population would say. So there really isn't this concept of like an unskilled worker who wants to work in a field coming up here to pick fruit. They can't come to this country legally.
Yeah, no, that's
so that's the truth.
Even temporarily anymore. The cost of avocados specifically has skyrocketed this year specifically because they're sitting on the vines rotting because we won't let the migrant workers come across and get them for sale. They were grown, but now there's nobody to work those fields.
So it's just like this. It's comical, and everybody acknowledges this, right? Like if you go and talk to the people who do know what they're talking about, even on the right wing, they go, "Oh yeah, the system is totally broken. It makes no sense. It's an indefensible status quo." So when people say, "Well, just follow the law," they are revealing their ignorance. They have because the law doesn't make any sense and it doesn't work, and nobody who knows it says that it does. So not even right wingers. And then there are far right wingers who want to ethnically cleanse the country, but that's different than saying they don't want any immigration, legal or illegal. And that's they don't care that no one can come in this country legally or it's incoherent because they don't want to have non-whites in the country. So those are the positions. Either knowledge that it doesn't work or you're a literal Nazi.
So here's a much more lighthearted and Twitch-centered question from Redheaded Gamer Chick. She's asking, how do I get sponsored to Twitch Politics? Which I think the intent of her question is, how do I get involved in politics on Twitch? I'd love to hear your opinion, and then I'm going to go ahead and follow that one up since I have an expertise in this one now.
Oh, I might have to throw this back to you, but
sure.
I think the number one thing that you can do is you can go to my channel, Central_Committee on Twitch.tv. You can hit the follow button. You can hit the subscribe button. You can, if you have the financial ability, donate as much money as you can. And the same with my host tonight, Alebrelle's channel. Hit the follow button, subscribe, show up, and signal boost us. Like that's the best thing that you can do on Twitch. And then help support other left-wing channels. Like I'm serious, like you would be surprised just supporting people with your views and with your money makes these ideas more prominent. That's just the way the world works. So that's my plug answer to that question.
I love that. I love that take. Not everyone has to be an activist. Not everyone has to be an educator to make a difference. Being somebody in the audience matters. That being said, if you want to do what we're doing, all it takes All I did to get into politics here on Twitch, because I started out LGBT and feminist education was pretty much my exclusive. And I've added on leftist politics in the last 9 to 12 months over things. And I did that gradually. All you have to do is start paying attention to the spaces that are talking about these things, start developing your ideas, educating yourself in a pretty basic way, and then pick one or two topics that you find the most interest in and do a little bit of research on them, get a strong understanding, and start talking about that one or two things that really matter to you and you have an understanding of. You're going to have people that challenge your ideas on this. Don't be afraid to be wrong occasionally, but more importantly, don't be afraid to ever say, I don't know. Let me get back to you on that. Would you rather come back another stream, or do you want a private DM from me when I find out what my answer on that question is? Being a showing that you're willing to grow and learn really matters on this platform to your viewers. It's powerful for somebody to know that you are listening to them individually and as a collective. So yeah, do it piecemeal. Learn one or two things and integrate it.
Yeah. Yep.
So here's a very particular question about electoral stuff, which I know you know about.
Sure.
So I don't even understand this question, so I'm going to read it verbatim to you. With the new superdelegate rules, to win on the first ballot, do you need 51% of pledged delegates or 51% of total delegates, even though pledged delegates can't vote in the first round? And can you explain the question to me so that I know what you're answering?
Sure. The answer is 51% of pledged. What is a superdelegate? Basically, in the Democratic nomination, there are two types of the way we pick the nominee of the party is we have a big party called the Democratic National Convention, and all the Democrats that are picked in these statewide primaries, they're called delegates, and they pledge to vote for a candidate. And so you don't vote for Bernie Sanders, you vote for your Pennsylvania Bernie Sanders supporters who pledge to vote for Bernie Sanders, right? And the number of delegates is based on the population of your state. And so those people who pledge to vote, so if Bernie Sanders win your primary, he gets a certain proportional allocation of those delegates. He gets a bonus for winning the state. And then everyone who finishes seconds and third, if they get 15% of the vote, and they get a certain amount of delegates as well. And those go to the big party in the DNC. Those are the pledged delegates. Then there is another category of people called super delegates, and they are party bigwigs. So we're talking about members of Congress, senators, former presidents, state party officials, so like the chairperson of the Democratic Party of New York, who is elected by the New York Democratic Party people, is like a super delegate. And there's a few others, but they are, very prominent national Democrats, like the governors of states. And those are the super delegates. And so in 2016, the super delegates could vote in the first ballot, which is when the party gets together, somebody needs to get 51% of the delegates to get the nomination, if that makes sense. Yeah, stop me if you need clarifying question.
I think I followed enough of it. Also,
and so there you go. And so after 2016, there was a Unity Reform Commission that said super delegates can't vote in the first ballot. So when it's all said and done, if somebody has won 51% of the elected delegates, those pledged delegates, then they become the nominee. If nobody has, then there's another ballot, and the super delegates can vote as well. And then you need 51% of all delegates. So first ballot, 51% of pledged. If no one gets 51% of pledged, then we go to the second ballot where the super delegates can vote. Does that answer your question?
I am going to assume it does, because I'm filtering through chat, trying to pick out the good questions for you as well. So my actual listening comprehension is a little bit weaker than I'd like it to be, but thus is the problem without having solicited questions ahead of time.
Yeah. You probably don't need to worry about this process.
No,
We've got it handled.
I'm not super worried about it. That's why I haven't looked into it, because I know that the particulars of how our voting system is broken, I don't necessarily need to have a strong understanding of.
Listen, Bernie's paying attention in their campaign. They're handling this. They'll tell you if they need your help on the delegate side.
Danny Den, yes, Signal Boost. Be here. Tell people to follow us. Tell people that we're live. Give us money is always a nice one. But yeah, Signal Boost means do anything you can to put ours and similar voices forward when people ask. That's what we mean by that phrase. So another question from Waffles in my chat. I'm going to mostly paraphrase because this was a large paragraph. But thank you for the bits, Polly. But Waffle says it's been shown now that there's a lot of racist and white nationalist leanings in our American policing, and due to this severely impacts the way that we do things. What might be some ways to be able to fix the way we perform policing is doing it as a civil duty similar to jury duty on a rotating basis. That's one of my favorite answers, but I don't know that that necessarily fits into our society right now. What's the solution to the fact that white nationalists have infiltrated policing?
Yeah, this is a complex one, but and you could write books about this topic, and there
Sure.
are books written about this topic. But to try to be as short as I can, the first is you've got to remove the authority that is used to oppress communities of color. So ending our the racial caste system and the new Jim Crow of the prison industrial complex, the school to prison pipeline, the drug war and how it's disproportionately focused on communities of color. We need a new policing regime. I'm supportive of like a concept of a national ombudsman of the police. So basically, whenever a police use violence against citizens, they don't investigate their own use. It goes to an independent federal administration, and they provide the investigation into like police of use of force incidents. There should be federal guidelines on the use of force. We should demilitarize the police and all those programs with that. We should have cultural changes within police departments, and we should directly target white nationalist police officers for removal. Like those are like some of the things that I would say.
Sure. And
by the way, Bernie
Portland's,
just came out with a criminal justice reform platform. You should definitely read that.
Yeah, to Portland's credit, my understanding is ahead of what did happen. There were a few police officers that were found out and faced some sort of actions. Quick call out from the Surfs TV in channel. Everybody, speaking of signal boosting, please go follow the Surfs. They're amazing. Lance is the one that I've met and talked with a great deal, and they do all this sort of talking as well. They talk leftist politics. They're, I would say, more left than you, correct, Mike? And I think
probably
just barely to my right is my understanding of where they land on everything.
Probably
give them a follow.
Probably to the left, but and tell them to host me more.
There you go. So Surfs, that's what you can do. But they ask, Mike, why are you such a filthy pinko commie from the Surfs?
I wouldn't call myself a commie. Sorry for all my commie brothers and sisters and the disappointment that gives you.
Called out.
But it really comes from a labor background. My family history is one of union men and union women. And, my grandfather was a dyed-in-the-wool anti-fascist who went and fought in World War II. He left in 1939 before the United States was there. He went up to Canada to join in so he could fight fascists. So, like, that's where I come from, right? And that's why I have these views is and by the way, I'm not a red diaper baby. Like there are conservatives, like in my family. I would consider my dad to be a conservative, right? But he did have that labor background and an understanding of class consciousness and solidarity. And so that is what I have. That's what motivates me, right? Is is a belief in that we're stronger together. Together, united we bargain, divided we beg, right? Like that's the kind of the way I look at society is I'm just a dude, right? I'm easily destroyed. But all of us together, that's something different. We can't be stopped.
Yes.
There you go.
That's what labor is all about, labor movements, etc. There's a lot of people in chat that are asking very detailed electoral fucking questions. Guys, I'm going to tell you that
you can go to my stream for that.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm going to say. Is that's one of Mike's specialties, and he can talk blue in the face about the tiny niggling details as to how electoral politics and function work. So if you want to ask those detailed questions, give him a follow. He's live most nights, right? Do you have a set schedule yet?
I mean, I'm trying to, probably Monday through Thursday, I'll be doing kind of the afternoon commute home. So like starting 3 p.m. Eastern. That's what I'm looking at. Noon, lunchtime for Pacific people. Europeans, I'll be your prime time, 8 p.m. I think that's like a little bit soft right now as far as like schedules for people. So I think that really fits in well. And then like Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I'll try to do some later night stuff. That's what I'm going with right now. And that may flex. Again, I've been doing this all of 8 days. So don't hold me to all these as permanent promises.
Yeah, sure, absolutely, because you're an adult with a fully fledged life going on, etc. I don't think most people really will hold that against you.
So I'm trying to do a lot, but sleep.
Ricky, Mike, if you exclamation mark guest, Mike is a political organizer and activist in PA.
Yeah, and if you have Pennsylvania specific questions, I will be happy to answer those over in my stream. We've done a couple of them already, but
So one of my regulars, Mr. Squarepeg, has asked a couple of times, so he clearly very much cares about this. What is the likelihood that the Republican Party itself dies off sometime in the near future?
Very unlikely.
Right. And if that ever does occur, what might take its place?
I think it's already happening. It's important to remember that the Republican and Democratic labels are meaningless for the most part. They're just brands, they're national organizations that have a preferential position on the ballot. Like that's the primary function of the Democratic and Republican Party. Is that if you're the Democratic nominee, that gives you a lot of rights over, say, what a Green Party nominee would have for an elected official, for a position. So those are the primary purposes of that. Like, as far as like what's happened to the Republican Party, it's transitioning to more of a white identity, explicitly fascist party, and away from this kind of soft, the neoconservative, market-focused, corporatist party. And I think they're coming up with a corporatist fascist synthesis. And there's a lot of money behind that. And white identity is an important part of right-wing organizing and politics in America and has been since our founding. So the idea that the right's going away anytime soon, I find that unlikely. Sorry to be a buzzkill.
No, I think I'm with you on that. Grip 9K talks for a little while about the security of electronic voting devices. And since we are well familiar with how poor they are security-wise, how do we trust them, and what's the solution to those voting stations? Basically, what do we do about how broken even counting our votes are right now?
So there's a really important bill that was passed by the Democrats in the House called House Resolution 1, which dealt explicitly with this problem. And unfortunately, the Republicans control the Senate, and they're not going to allow this bill to advance. So the number one thing we could do is win political power, and we can fix these. As far as voting machines are usually picked at the county level. So organize locally with your other concerned citizens that you have about electoral ballot reform and security. And that's my answer to that. And it sucks because, the fact is electronic voting machines are very hackable. And, volunteer to be a poll worker with a campaign locally. You can sit there and watch as people count votes, but I don't think there has been evidence of actual changing of ballots, changing of votes that's been discovered. And I'm free to correct me if you guys know. It's just a potential risk that we don't want to happen, and then have to deal with the consequences, right? Like we'd rather head that off. So, support them. Like this is one of those where vote blue. This is what you're going to get if they win. Like they're going to give you electoral reform and protect the ballot.
Court Dactyl says basically, I find Mayor Pete fascinating, but he, is not doing very well in the polls. What's his end game? What role is he actually trying to get out of being on the national stage right now?
So I'm not a big Pete fan myself, and that's because the role of the president is serious, and I think it's inappropriate for a 35-year-old or 36-year-old, however old is, who is a mayor of a small college town, to run for president. I think we touched on this earlier. Like he's just not ready to be president. He doesn't have the knowledge of federal government at the level necessary. And I think there's problematic elements of his background that concern me, like as a governor and his work in the private sector. So this is not a Pete bash stream. I'm just saying that's my problem.
They did want to jump in and say that they found him fascinating as a cautionary tale.
Oh, okay. What is his end game? Oh, yeah. So getting to the other part of the question, the end game, like he would like a cabinet position. He would like to move from Indiana, where he feels like his political ceiling is very low because it leans red, and he would like to get to Washington in some form, hopefully through a cabinet position. I think that's kind of his end game. Like he wants to leave Indiana. That's it.
Let's shift down to first gear all of a sudden on this one. Somebody wants to know what kind of music you listen to.
I am like the boomerist person on music opinions. Jameson picks most of the stuff that I listen to. My friend,
you let your mod pick your music.
He's not just my mod. He's a friend of mine, and he really turned me on recently to this. And I'm gonna plug it because I absolutely love this song, and I play it like every time I start my stream. It is hold on. It is called "Little Dragon" by Cat Rider, I'm sorry, it's Cat Rider by Little Dragon, the other way around. Really cool song. Check them out. It's up on YouTube. So that's what I would say. But as far as like music taste, I'm not the guy. I'm awful at it. Yeah. I need to learn more. If you have good recs, feel free. And I love Cardi, obviously.
Cardi B.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't keep up on pop music myself. I might be more boomery on my music than you.
Doubtful.
If you like Cardi B, like I think the only bands that I listen to that are still producing music are ones that have been around for quite a while, or are in a genre that is incredibly, like, I listen to a few bands that are still producing bluegrass music.
Cool.
And they might be giants, but they've been actively producing music for 4 decades at this point. Like, yeah. Here's a good one. I like this. This is a good question. But a quick one-off. The Surfs asked, and I'm going to give you this one too, roughly verbatim. Do you get down with Butter Horse?
Well, that's a meme that I'm not sure that I know it.
That was well dodged, sir. Well dodged.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I know that meme. Thanks, though.
Yeah, that's
look into it.
They're trying to make fetch happen. Is all I can tell you on that one. Lycheens asks, how do you think the conversation from the far left to liberals is going right now? And how do you think it might go a little bit better? Because I think that you're going to say that the conversation isn't going particularly well right now.
So it depends on what you're talking about. Like if you're referring to progressives gaining elite credibility in something like MSNBC, the answer is not well, or the New York Times or the Washington Post. If you're saying, what's the idea of voters or the mass of the people, it's going very well. I recently saw a poll where pretty much every progressive position has strong majority support in the country. And stuff like Medicare for all gets 85, between like 75 and 85% support among Democratic voters. One thing that I talked about yesterday was after the second debate, polls were done about performance. And people like John Delaney, 2% of voters increased their position, their favorability of John Delaney, and 35% got significantly worse. And it's a mirror for people like Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. They're significantly better, and very few people thought of them worse. So as far as like the conversation to the people, going very well. As far as those elites who have the national megaphone, not well. And they're a lagging indicator. So expect to have obnoxious shit on MSNBC for the foreseeable future.
You don't have much love for MSNBC, huh?
Except when Sam's on.
Okay, that's fair. So this is a good question. I have gone back and forth on this one a lot myself. Ricky asks, do you have opinion on anarchists and other people who have been completely disenfranchised by the system, who refuse to vote on ideological grounds rather than those of just not wanting to? Because I think we can generally agree, even though I might forgive people on the extreme left that think that the system itself is corrupt, the people that are just not doing it because it's inconvenient, fuck them. But what's your opinion on people that don't participate in the system as it is now?
All right, so I'll put it this way: I don't consider myself an anarchist, and here's why. Voting is is one of the primary ways you could express power. It is not a personal statement of vanity. It's not a some sort of like moral position. Not to be too harsh on people who don't vote, but because of ideological reasons. But honestly, like voting is an objective indicia of your views, and it doesn't have any like. So what you do when you vote, what holds in your head doesn't matter. Okay, it is you claiming a small part of the power that's been assigned to you in the state. So
right,
you're
we
abdicating
talked about
power.
that, what you hold in your heart versus how you vote earlier today.
Okay, yeah, yeah. And so when you don't vote, even if it's for some sort of like high-minded reason, you're abdicating that power to those that do. So if you believe the state should be dismantled and you don't vote to make that happen, then the odds of that happening are decreased. I think that's just an objective fact, right? Or if you believe that the state should be less oppressive, if you don't support those people that also serve that goal, you can't be surprised when they don't take political power. And I'm not saying that electoralism is the solution to all problems, but there are limits to what direct action can do. And I can tell you that a protest in support of immigrant rights with President Bernie Sanders in office is going to have a hell of a lot more influence than a protest on immigrant rights when Donald Trump is in office. This is just, they have different interests that support them, and Bernie Sanders depends upon those people who support immigrants' rights to maintain his power. So if you don't participate in that, then you can't be surprised when it doesn't happen. And I think abstention from voting, like, haven't we been trying that? Half the country has been trying that for how long? How's that working out for them?
I think a fair answer. I'm going to take an absurd level of a follow-up question from somebody in chat
Sure.
asking about what about people that, the machines are hacked, etc. What do you say to, would you have similar words to people, say, in Russia or North Korea, where their leaders have won with landslide victories of 98% of the populace, etc.? What about the people who strongly believe that the system is completely rigged at the highest levels, and the
Right.
vote literally does not empower anything and is completely a waste?
I don't think that's true here.
I don't
I
think
don't
so
think
either
I don't think
personally,
there's evidence of that.
but I
Uh,
think that there are some localities that we have shown the machines malfunction in some very peculiar ways that do not seem to be natural malfunctions.
yeah, and I don't have a quibble with that. What I would tell you is make them cheat. Like, go up, show up, and protest and pay attention and make the machine cheap, because every time you make it harder, the more people that show up and vote one way, like if 200 people show up to vote and it shows like 150 of them vote for Hillary, and then you go and talk to those people and 150 of them say they voted for Bernie, just as an example, that's something that you can use to raise the consciousness and cause reform, because you've caught people committing the crime. Now, in places like North Korea, I don't know about North Korea. I don't know how to listen. I'm not going to be able to tell my North Korean brothers and sisters how to organize out of that one. That's a tough one. Um, I have thoughts, but I think that it would be ridiculously privileged of me to even say anything. As far as like Russia, um, I can always speak to what I think I would do. And with all humility, it's difficult when there's physical threat, and I'm not trying to pretend like I'm some super brave person, but
Right.
you have to resist in every way that you can and protest. If that means an organized boycott of an election, if you can get everybody in the country just not to show up to their sham election, that exposes them on the international front. If there are some localities where you can legitimately win, you should pursue those. And it's tough. It's a tough situation, and I don't envy anybody there. Um, and I don't know that I necessarily have all the tools to help you, other than to provide solidarity and build that leftist international that we talked about earlier, and put pressure on regimes like Russia to not oppress their people. That's all we can do.
We're not doing very good at that right now,
Well, no, of
especially
course not. Yeah.
regarding Russia
Yeah.
specifically. But yeah. So following up on some international vibes, actually, Dr. Serotonin asks, this is a pretty broad question, and maybe you're not going to have one to interface, but what country do you think has the best political system? Dr. Serotonin's from Sweden, and he tends to think that their system is pretty superior to what we have here in the U.S., which I don't think is a hard stretch. Our system is heavily slanted towards a two-party system, and it creates a lot of problems.
I mean, I think anybody who's aware of the literature would just have to concede that Nordic systems are far more successful in every objective measurement than our own. So, like, you're looking at Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark. They're way better. Now, I'm not saying they don't have problems. Of course they do. But I mean, like Sweden, haven't they had a social democratic party ruling Sweden for like forever?
I think so. They're also like exceedingly the same religion too.
I mean, there are more foreign-born people in Sweden than in the United States. It doesn't mean that the United States is less diverse, but like they've definitely absorbed quite a large number of new immigrants.
Yeah.
So
One particularly heckling comment from chat, it says the U.S. has a one-party system. Don't kid yourself, which I think is not too far off as a critique.
yeah, I mean, yeah.
Gunch asks, do you think it's likely that one of the establishment Dems would end up being a VP for a progressive, or do you think it'll go vice versa? So if Warren or Bernie ends up getting the ticket, do you think they pick another small progressive individual, or do you think that to bolster the centrist votes, they end up picking somebody more established and more regular?
I mean, I don't think there's any value in picking a centrist, to be honest, because uh, the credibility of that person will be very low, and it kind of, I don't think it gets you anybody. I don't. I don't think that. Um, yeah. And as far as a centrist picking Bernie and Warren, like, I doubt it as well.
That seems highly unlikely to me. Yeah.
So I just don't think tactically it really gets you anybody, like, because they're not going to change their views on the issues. So picking a centrist who disagrees with them on the issues, you need another person who's going to go out there and strenuously argue for your positions, not somebody who's going to be embarrassed and have to change their minds on a bunch of stuff. Like, imagine if Bernie picked someone who didn't support Medicare for all, and that's like the primary focus of his campaign, and his VP is having to like change their mind publicly, and then are they going to be a passionate supporter of that? I just, I think that would be a bad look.
That's
Also, you need good. Also, you need good assassination insurance. I hate to be dark, but like,
ooh,
and Bernie and they're not young bucks. Like, people die in their 60s and 70s
Right.
all the time. You need somebody, and I know that's like kind of a morbid way of looking at it, but like,
well, pretty rarely once you have the money that the people in our governance does. But
true, but presidents die a lot. That's a pretty dangerous
sure.
Like,
sure.
Not advocating presidents dying. I'm just saying, like, you need to have a VP who would continue your views.
Here's my personal wish list: is we end up seeing Sanders Warren or Warren Sanders as the ticket. What do you think the likelihood of that is?
I think Sanders Warren is more likely. I think if Warren wins, she would probably pick somebody else, just because he would serve better as remaining in the Senate. Whereas with her, like, I think, again, like, she's a really good advocate. Like, I don't think you want to have a VP that's Bernie's age. I just think that's, the VP slot should be about bringing someone up to continue the fight in the future, a little bit. And I think for Warren, it would be wise to pick someone else. But I don't know. Who knows? I think Bernie Warren is the most likely ticket, in my opinion, by the way.
Here's a little bit of a weird question. I'm skipping most of the ones that don't seem super relevant, but this one is potentially fun, from Danny Den, asking, "What's up with billionaire Hoyer jumping in? He appears to be going into the next debate. Is he going to ask Sanders and Warren to please be nice to the mega rich?"
You mean Steyer?
Maybe. I'm reading what they wrote.
Yeah, Hoyer is a member of the Democratic leadership.
Steyer.
Yeah. Okay. I think it's ridiculous. Total waste of money. He's a moron for doing it.
What do you think about Yang?
I think that his coalition is extremely problematic. I don't like the way that he talks about, the UBI as an alternative to the welfare state. I think that's totally delusional. I think he's waffled on that. That said, like, I don't think that the idea of a UBI is inherently a bad one. Socialists and leftists disagree on this. Some people believe in job guarantee is better. Others think that direct cash assistance is like the best, most effective way of reducing poverty. It's like the most proven way. You just give people money and they get out of poverty. It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah. Well, that's what the whole microloan thing that happened in the early 2010s was predicated on that. And
the bad part of that was it's a loan. Just give people grants.
Well, sure, yeah, but this was capitalism infecting a good idea.
Sure. Right, exactly. Yeah. So, but if you're asking me personally, I kind of like the idea of UBIs. I think they're a pretty good idea overall.
I largely like the UBI myself.
I don't like Yang, though.
one thing that I've brought up is my understanding from the things that I've heard and read is that if not Yang himself, a lot of people in Yang's orbit want to use his specific proposal of a UBI to dismantle the current safety nets and
That would be terrible.
entitlements. And
That would be horrible.
my fear is that once they dismantle those large systems that have a lot of inertia, etc., once they get rid of those and everything moves to the UBI, they appeal the UBI. They repeal the UBI at that point too, leaving everybody without anything to fall back on. Which I think would the obvious end point of that would be another horrible depression. But that's my fear. Maybe no comment from you there.
No, I think you got it.
Sure.
Yeah, I think you hit it out of the park. The more me to add.
Jibby asks, what can we do to get rid of Citizens United?
What we talked about earlier. Probably packing
Vote.
the court slash
vote
you know,
and get Democrats in so
Clarence
that we can
Thomas
get lefter
dying.
people.
Clarence Thomas dying right shortly after or leaving the court, retiring after the next Democrat. Otherwise, like right now, 5 of the justices absolutely will uphold Citizens United to their last breath. So, I mean, there's a constitutional amendment, but Republicans will never support it.
Yeah. That's most of the questions that have happened.
All
Mike,
right.
do you have any last thoughts?
You know, it was a really fun conversation, and thanks to Hasan and Bad Bunny for the hosts.
Yeah, absolutely.
And thanks for inviting me on. I had a lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed it. And thank you for signal boosting me. And I've tried to return the favor when I can.
No, and like, please, like, don't think that my DMs are off limits to you. Like, any help that you need on your tech stuff, especially, let me know. Twitch culture is another thing that I feel like I've got a good handle on. So
cool.
if you need all of that.
All right. Well, thanks for the convo, and I'm probably going to take a little break, but maybe I'll start my stream up if anybody wants to talk more. I don't know if you're planning on staying on.
I probably don't want to go too much longer, so I'll probably hang out till you get started, and then I'll come bring all these people over to you.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much for the talk. I really appreciate it. And everyone, follow Alebrelle. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right.
No, you got it. I'd have told you if you were getting my name wrong.
And also Central Committee on Twitch. Come on over there, hit the follow button, second tab, and hopefully I'll see you guys soon.
Yeah, we'll be there. Have a good one, Mike. Thanks for coming around.
No problem. Bye-bye.
Bye.